Spring arrives quietly, not all at once, not like a switch being turned on. At first, it exists only as a subtle change in the atmosphere, a softer wind, a longer afternoon, soil that begins to loosen after months of cold compression. Tiny biological signals start appearing everywhere, almost beneath human awareness. And yet, your brain notices them. Even before trees fully bloom, the human nervous system begins responding to spring in measurable ways. Researchers have found that longer daylight hours slowly alter serotonin production, melatonin cycles, and even patterns of attention. People often describe spring as feeling lighter, but beneath that word is an enormous chain of chemical and environmental reactions unfolding silently around them. The strange thing is that most of life on Earth is waiting for these signals at the exact same time. Plants do not own calendars. Birds do not count dates. Insects do not know the names of months. Instead, the entire living world listens to temperature, light, moisture, and timing. Spring is not announced. It is detected. A tree, for example, can sense tiny increases in daylight through specialized cells that react to changing photoperiods. Even before warmth fully returns, certain species begin moving water upward from their roots, preparing for growth that has not happened yet. Inside a maple tree, pressure builds gradually as frozen sap begins to thaw and shift. Beneath the bark, invisible movement starts weeks before leaves appear. Entire forests wake up internally, long before they look awake from the outside. And this hidden beginning may be one of the most calming things about spring, because so much of nature operates slowly, patiently, and without spectacle. In modern life, people often expect visible results immediately. But spring reminds you that nearly every important transformation begins invisibly. Seeds spend long periods underground before anything breaks the surface. Tree buds form months before they open. Some flowers prepare for bloom during winter itself, storing energy quietly beneath frozen ground. Even migratory birds begin changing internally before migration starts. Their hormones shift as daylight increases, triggering restlessness known as Zugunruhe, a German word meaning migratory anxiety or migration urge. Tiny songbirds carrying bodies that weigh less than a small apple can travel thousands of miles because the planet itself changes light patterns around them, and they respond. It is difficult not to feel something calming in that idea. The Earth moves, and life answers. Spring also changes sound. Winter's soundscapes are often sparse. Air carries fewer insect noises. Many birds remain silent. Leaves are absent, reducing soft friction sounds in forests. But as spring unfolds, the acoustic world thickens. Birdsong increases dramatically at dawn because cooler morning air helps sound travel farther. Male birds sing to establish territory and attract mates. But the result for humans is something strangely emotional. The human brain appears highly sensitive to layered natural sound patterns. Studies suggest birdsong may reduce stress recovery time and improve perceived mental restoration, not because birds are trying to relax anyone, but because for most of human history, rich, natural sound environments often signaled safety, water, warmth, vegetation, and seasonal abundance. Your nervous system may still carry ancient associations connected to those sounds. Even rain changes in spring. Spring rain is often softer than summer storms. It tends to arrive in longer, steadier systems because of shifting atmospheric boundaries between cold and warm air masses. And there is another detail many people never think about. The smell after rain, petrichor, becomes especially noticeable during spring because soil bacteria called actinomycetes release compounds into damp air. Plants also emit oils during dry periods that are later lifted by rainfall. That familiar earthy scent is partly biological chemistry drifting upward from living soil. The relaxing feeling connected to spring weather may not be imagination at all. It may be a deep recognition of environmental stability returning after scarcity. And then, almost without noticing, spring slowly becomes summer. Not overnight, just gradually enough that memory struggles to locate the exact transition point. Summer feels different from spring because biological activity reaches its peak intensity. Days become longer. In many regions, plant growth accelerates rapidly. Pollinators move constantly through landscapes filled with flowers that exist for only brief windows of time. A single bee may visit thousands of flowers in one day, and flowers evolved extraordinary methods for attracting them. Some flowers generate ultraviolet patterns invisible to humans but highly visible to bees. To human eyes, petals may appear simple, but to pollinators, they contain glowing landing guides directing insects toward nectar. Entire hidden visual systems exist around you all summer long. The natural world is layered with signals humans cannot normally perceive. Birds navigate partly through magnetic fields. Bees detect polarized light. Certain flowers track the movement of the sun across the sky. Trees communicate stress chemically through airborne compounds. Even forests are less separate than they appear. Underground fungal networks connect plant roots through structures sometimes called mycorrhizal networks. Nutrients and signaling molecules can pass between plants through these systems. A forest is not merely a collection of individual trees, it is also a conversation, and summer reveals the fullness of that conversation. The air becomes heavy with movement. Insects hum in tall grass. Cicadas vibrate entire afternoons with mechanical rhythm. Warm winds move through leaves in waves that almost resemble ocean currents. There is something hypnotic about repetitive natural patterns, waves, rain. Of corriga, wind, crickets, the human brain often relaxes in response to repeating, non-threatening sensory input. Predictable rhythms reduce the need for constant vigilance. Nature rarely moves in perfect straight lines. Instead, it pulses. Branches sway irregularly. Water ripples unpredictably. Cloud shadows drift slowly over fields. And perhaps this is why natural environments often feel mentally restorative. They hold attention softly without demanding it completely. Psychologists sometimes call this soft fascination. A river captures awareness, but gently. A campfire holds your focus. Without pressure, summer evenings are especially full of this effect. As daylight fades, temperatures slowly decline, and many environments become quieter. Human activity reduces. Birdsong changes. Light softens into longer wavelengths, creating orange and gold tones because sunlight travels through more atmosphere near sunset. Even the colors of evening are a result of planetary geometry. The world feels calmer, partly because the physics of light itself has changed, and humans seem deeply responsive to twilight. Across cultures and history, evening has often been associated with reflection, storytelling, memory, and emotional processing. There is a psychological softness to late summer evenings that many people recognize immediately but rarely analyze. Perhaps because transitions themselves carry emotional weight. Spring is transition, summer is fullness, and then, almost invisibly at first, decline begins. Leaves remain green for a long time before autumn arrives, but eventually trees start preparing for winter months before temperatures become truly cold. This preparation is surprisingly deliberate. Trees do not simply lose leaves, they withdraw from them. As daylight shortens, deciduous trees begin breaking down chlorophyll, reclaiming nutrients and storing energy internally. Green pigments fade away, revealing yellows, oranges, and reds that were often present all along. Autumn colors are partly hidden colors finally becoming visible, and there is something deeply reflective in that. Because many things in life remain concealed until conditions change, some species become more beautiful precisely at the moment they begin letting go. Maple leaves can contain anthocyanins, pigments also found in blueberries and cherries. Scientists still debate why some trees produce especially vivid red coloration during autumn. One theory suggests the pigments protect leaves from excess light, while nutrients are being reabsorbed. Even decay, in nature, is highly organized. Nothing is wasted unnecessarily. Leaves fall and become soil. Dead wood feeds fungi. Fungi feed forests. Forests influence rainfall. Rainfall shapes rivers. Rivers reshape landscapes. Nature continuously recycles structure into new structure, and autumn may feel calming because it makes this process visible. Modern human systems often hide cycles. Food appears in stores disconnected from seasons. Buildings resist weather. Artificial light weakens awareness of changing daylight, but autumn still reaches people somehow, perhaps because slowing down is impossible to ignore forever. Air becomes sharper, morning arrives later, bird migration returns. In some regions, millions of monarch butterflies begin extraordinary journeys southward, navigating across continents with nervous systems smaller than a grain of rice. No single butterfly completes the entire multi-generational migration cycle alone. The journey continues across generations. There is something profoundly quiet in that idea. Life continues through participation, not permanence. And then there are the sounds of autumn. Dry leaves moving across pavement, wind through nearly bare branches, distant geese overhead. Even silence itself changes during fall. As insect populations decrease and vegetation thins, environments often become acoustically emptier again. The world slowly opens space for winter. And perhaps one reason seasonal transitions feel emotional is because humans evolved inside them for hundreds of thousands of years. Before modern climate control, people experienced seasonal rhythms physically. Food availability changed, sleep patterns changed, activity levels changed, social behavior changed. Human biology still carries traces of these ancient cycles. Researchers have observed seasonal shifts in mood, metabolism, immune activity, and sleep architecture. Even cognition may subtly fluctuate with seasonal light exposure. You are not separate from seasons. You are shaped by them constantly, even indoors. And maybe that realization itself feels calming, because modern life often encourages the illusion that humans exist outside nature, managing it from a distance. But your body still responds to sunrise. Your brain still notices weather. Your hormones still react to darkness and light. The ancient systems remain active beneath modern routines. And throughout spring, summer, and autumn, the Earth continues its enormous quiet rotation through space. The planet tilts, light shifts, temperatures respond, plants adapt, animals migrate, cloud systems reorganize, leaves emerge and disappear, all with astonishing patience. Nature rarely rushes. A tree may spend decades reaching full height. A forest may take centuries to mature. Soil itself forms slowly through weathering, decomposition, fungi, bacteria, moisture, and time. Even mountains move, only at speeds difficult for humans to notice. The natural world operates on layers of time much larger than ordinary schedules. And listening to these patterns can make human urgency feel softer around the edges, not unimportant, just smaller. Spring eventually becomes summer. Summer eventually becomes autumn. And every year, the cycle repeats with slight differences no human fully controls. No spring is identical to another. No sunset ever repeats perfectly. No two autumn forests contain the exact same arrangement of color, moisture, temperature, sound, and wind. Nature continuously changes while remaining recognizable. Perhaps that balance is part of what people find comforting. The world transforms constantly, yet somehow remains familiar. And somewhere tonight, rain is moving across dark fields. Somewhere, flowers are closing until morning. Somewhere, trees are transferring nutrients into hidden roots beneath cooling soil. Migrating birds are crossing invisible pathways overhead. Fungi are spreading quietly through forests beneath fallen leaves. The earth continues its slow seasonal breathing whether anyone notices or not. And maybe there is something deeply restful in remembering that life does not depend entirely on constant human attention. The seasons know what to do. They have known for millions of years, long before cities, long before clocks, long before anyone stayed awake wondering whether the world would keep turning through the night. It always has. And outside, beyond walls and screens and schedules, spring still becomes summer. Summer still becomes autumn. And the quiet cycle continues exactly as it always has. There is also something strangely comforting about how imperfect the seasons are. People often imagine nature as balanced and harmonious. But real ecosystems are filled with uncertainty, adaptation, and constant adjustment. A late frost can interrupt blooming cycles. A dry summer can delay flowering. Heavy rainfall can change migration timing for birds and insects. And yet, life continues responding, not perfectly, but persistently. A tree damaged by one harsh season may still produce leaves the following year. Wild grasses return after fire. Forests regrow after storms. Certain pine cones even require extreme heat before they release seeds. Some forms of growth only begin after disruption. Nature does not expect permanence. It expects change, and perhaps that is one reason natural environments often feel psychologically stabilizing. They quietly demonstrate that change is not always failure. Transformation is built into the structure of living systems. Even the timing of flowers reveals this patience. Not all spring flowers bloom together. Some species emerge extremely early, taking advantage of open sunlight before tree canopies fully develop. These are known as spring ephemerals. Tiny woodland flowers like trilliums and bloodroots live in a narrow seasonal window. They rise quickly, bloom briefly, absorb sunlight, and retreat underground before summer shade arrives. For much of the year, they are invisible. Their entire visible existence may last only weeks, but underground, they continue living quietly. There is something deeply reflective in the idea that not all life is meant to remain constantly visible. Some processes happen beneath attention. Some forms of growth require retreat, and forests are full of these hidden timelines. In old forests, certain trees may be hundreds of years old, while appearing almost motionless from day to day. But inside them, movement never fully stops. Water travels upward through microscopic tubes called xylem. Sugars move downward through phloem tissue. Roots exchange minerals with fungi beneath the soil. A large tree can move hundreds of liters of water in a single day. Entire columns of moisture rise silently from the ground into the atmosphere through leaves. Forests partially create their own weather. When trees release water vapor through transpiration, that moisture contributes to humidity, cloud formation, and rainfall patterns. Vast forests like the Amazon rainforest influence atmospheric systems across enormous distances. A forest is not simply growing inside climate, it is helping shape climate itself. And this interconnectedness appears everywhere once you begin noticing it. Bees depend on flowers. Flowers depend on pollinators. Birds depend on insects. Forests depend on fungi. Humans depend on oxygen, water cycles, soil stability, temperature regulation, and countless invisible ecological processes happening constantly around them. Much of life is cooperative in ways that remain largely unseen. Even autumn leaves falling to the ground are not signs of simple ending. Fallen leaves insulate soil, retain moisture, feed decomposers, and create habitats for insects during winter months. Decay supports continuation. Nature rarely wastes transition, and perhaps this is one of the quietest lessons the seasons offer. Nothing truly stands alone. Not weather, not forests, not oceans, not human beings. Everything exists inside systems larger than itself. The ocean, for example, changes with the seasons in ways most people never directly observe. During spring and summer, increasing sunlight near the surface encourages enormous blooms of phytoplankton, microscopic organisms drifting through water. These tiny organisms produce a significant portion of Earth's oxygen. Much of the air you breathe may originate partly from invisible marine life suspended in sunlight thousands of miles away. The planet functions through astonishingly delicate exchanges, and still, it remains remarkably resilient. Night during warmer seasons also changes in subtle ways. Summer nights often contain more scent molecules because warmth increases evaporation from plants and soil. Jasmine, honeysuckle, and certain night-blooming flowers release stronger fragrances after sunset specifically to attract nocturnal pollinators like moths. Even darkness contains biological activity designed around timing. Owls become active, bats emerge, frogs begin calling near water. The nighttime world is not empty. It is simply operating on a different schedule, and human beings may be more connected to these cycles than modern life allows them to notice. For most of history, artificial light was extremely limited. Human sleep patterns were more closely synchronized with seasonal darkness. In winter, people often slept longer. In summer, evenings remained socially active later into the night. because daylight persisted. The invention of electric lighting dramatically changed human relationships with natural timing, but your brain still responds to evening light levels automatically. Melatonin rises, body temperature shifts, alertness changes. Ancient biological rhythms continue operating beneath modern technology, and perhaps this is why natural settings can sometimes feel mentally clarifying. They reduce conflict between internal rhythms and external environments. Sunrise arrives gradually. Evening fades slowly. Nothing flashes urgently. Nothing demands instant reaction. A river does not hurry. Rain does not multitask. Clouds do not compete. Nature often moves at speeds closer to the nervous system humans evolved with. This slower pacing may partially explain why people frequently experience altered perception of time outdoors. Hours can feel softer, less divided, less aggressively measured. A long walk through a forest may feel mentally spacious in a way modern environments rarely do. And interestingly, scientists studying attention restoration have found that natural environments appear to reduce cognitive fatigue partly because they engage involuntary attention gently rather than forcing directed concentration continuously. In cities, attention is constantly pulled. Traffic, notifications, advertisements, signals, noise. But in nature, attention drifts more naturally. A moving branch catches the eye for a moment, then a bird call, then shifting sunlight. The brain remains engaged without becoming overloaded, and throughout spring and summer especially, light itself becomes more abundant. Longer daylight hours influence human psychology in powerful ways. Exposure to natural morning light helps regulate circadian rhythms, improving sleep timing and hormonal balance. Sunlight also contributes to vitamin D synthesis, which affects immune function, mood regulation, and overall health. But beyond biology, light changes emotional perception. Rooms feel different in spring sunlight. Streets feel different in golden evening light. Even memory appears connected to seasonal atmosphere. Many people can recall specific summers from childhood partly through sensory fragments. Warm pavement after rain, distant lawnmowers, insects humming at dusk, sunlight through curtains late in the evening. Seasonal memory is often sensory before it is verbal. And perhaps that is why the seasons feel so emotionally deep. They do not simply pass through calendars. They pass through the body. Temperature, scent, sound, color, daylight, texture, humidity, and movement all change together gradually over time. The brain experiences these layered transitions continuously, often without conscious analysis. You feel seasons before you fully think about them. And outside tonight, somewhere beyond immediate attention, another quiet transition is already beginning. A bud forming for next spring, a bird preparing for migration, seeds drying in autumn fields, trees storing energy underground. The planet slowly turning toward another season before the current one has fully ended. The cycles overlap endlessly, one beginning hidden inside another ending, and the Earth continues moving with extraordinary patience through all of it. There are places on Earth where the changing seasons become so dramatic that entire landscapes seem to transform into different worlds. In northern forests, spring can arrive after months of silence and snow cover. Rivers begin breaking apart first. Ice fractures slowly under pressure and temperature shifts, producing deep cracking sounds that echo across cold water. Then sunlight lingers slightly longer each evening. Then moss softens. Then migratory birds return in waves. And suddenly, ecosystems that appeared frozen and inactive reveal enormous hidden activity beneath the surface. What appears lifeless in winter is often simply waiting. This pattern exists throughout nature. Many insects survive cold months in suspended states. Certain frogs partially freeze during winter and thaw again later. Some trees contain natural compounds that reduce ice damage inside their cells. Life has evolved remarkable strategies for enduring difficult seasons without resisting them completely. Instead of fighting winter endlessly, nature often adapts around it. And there is something calming in observing systems that survive through flexibility rather than constant force. Even deserts follow seasonal rhythms more than many people realize. Dry regions that appear empty can suddenly bloom after rare rainfall events. Seeds may remain dormant for years beneath the ground, waiting for exact environmental conditions before germinating. Entire fields of flowers can emerge from landscapes that seemed completely barren only days earlier. Potential exists quietly in many environments long before visible change appears. And oceans follow seasonal cycles too. During warmer months, coral reefs become intensely active ecosystems filled with movement, color, and exchange. Tiny fish clean parasites from larger fish. Coral polyps extend feeding structures into passing currents. Sea turtles migrate across enormous distances guided partly by Earth's magnetic field. Many marine migrations remain astonishingly mysterious even now. Some whales travel thousands of miles between feeding and breeding grounds with remarkable consistency. Certain species appear capable of navigating through combinations of sound, magnetic sensing, memory, and oceanic cues humans still do not fully understand. The planet is full of navigation systems older than human maps. Birds crossing continents, salmon returning to rivers where they were born, sea turtles locating distant coastlines decades later, monarch butterflies migrating across multiple generations. Nature remembers pathways through methods that often feel almost impossible. And maybe part of what relaxes the human mind is exposure to systems that function without constant explanation. Not everything in nature is fully understood. Even now, forests still contain undiscovered species. Deep oceans remain largely unexplored. Scientists continue learning how trees exchange information, how animals navigate, how ecosystems stabilize themselves after disruption. The more humans study nature, the more complexity appears. And complexity, when it unfolds slowly, can feel strangely peaceful, not confusing, just deep. A night sky offers a similar feeling. During spring and summer, many regions experience clearer evening conditions that reveal more stars overhead. And while modern cities often reduce visibility through artificial light, truly dark environments can still show astonishing detail. Thousands of stars, the pale structure of the Milky Way, occasional satellites moving silently overhead, meteor showers appearing unexpectedly for only seconds. And perhaps one of the most calming facts about the night sky is that much of what you see is extremely old. Some starlight reaching your eyes tonight began traveling through space before modern civilization existed. Looking upward is partly looking backward through time. The universe itself moves slowly on scales difficult to emotionally grasp. Galaxies rotate over millions of years. Stars form gradually inside clouds of gas and dust. Planets cool over immense stretches of time. Compared to these rhythms, human urgency becomes very small and very temporary, not meaningless, just temporary. And nature often offers this perspective gently rather than harshly. A single falling leaf can remind someone that seasons change. A sunset can quietly interrupt anxious thought for a few moments. Rain against windows can soften mental noise simply through repetition and texture. Natural experiences rarely demand interpretation. They simply continue existing. Waves continue reaching shorelines whether observed or not. Trees continue growing ring by ring each year. The moon continues affecting tides across the entire planet. Even now, oceans are slowly rising and falling because of gravitational relationships between Earth, Moon, and Sun. The calm movement of tides is partly astronomy made visible, and throughout spring and summer, coastal regions often reveal these rhythms more clearly. Tidal pools appear and disappear. Shorebirds feed according to changing water levels. Moonlight reflects differently across warmer ocean surfaces. Many natural patterns repeat with such reliability that humans built entire calendars around them. Planting seasons, harvest seasons, migration periods, lunar cycles, long before mechanical clocks. People understood time largely through environmental change. And maybe modern life sometimes feels mentally exhausting because human systems increasingly separate experience from natural timing. Artificial light weakens darkness. Temperature control reduces seasonal variation indoors. Digital environments operate continuously regardless of weather or daylight. But the body still remembers older rhythms. Many people feel more tired during dark winters, more alert during bright mornings, more reflective during autumn evenings. Seasonal influence still moves quietly through human psychology, whether consciously acknowledged or not. Even appetite can shift seasonally. Research suggests humans may unconsciously prefer different foods depending on temperature, daylight, and energy demands. Sleep duration can subtly change throughout the year as well. You remain biological, even in highly technological environments. And perhaps remembering this feels relieving, because it means exhaustion is not always personal failure. Sometimes the body is simply responding to conditions. Nature never expects permanent productivity. Fields rest. Trees enter dormancy. Animals hibernate. Growth itself often occurs in cycles rather than constant upward motion. A forest does not bloom every day of the year, and yet forests endure for centuries. There is wisdom in sustainable rhythm. Even silence in nature tends to arrive gradually. Late autumn fields become quieter than summer meadows. Fewer insects move through cooling air. Birdsong decreases. Wind becomes more noticeable again as leaves disappear from branches. The world slowly simplifies itself, and winter approaches not as a sudden event, but as a long preparation. Seeds settle into soil, animals store food, trees conserve resources, water hardens into ice in colder regions. Nature prepares carefully. Nothing rushes the transition, and perhaps that is one of the most deeply relaxing truths hidden inside the seasons. The earth does not panic about change. It adjusts again and again, year after year. For millions of years, life has adapted to shifting temperatures, storms, droughts, darkness, abundance, migration, decay, and renewal. Not perfectly, but continuously. And tonight, somewhere beyond the noise of human schedules, spring rain may still be falling softly through dark forests. Somewhere, summer insects are humming beneath warm night air. Somewhere, autumn leaves are drifting slowly across quiet roads. The seasons continue moving across the planet in endless sequence, patient and unhurried, carrying oceans, forests, clouds, animals, and human lives together through another turning of the earth. There is a quiet pattern hidden inside nearly every natural cycle. Nothing stays at its peak forever. Not storms, not flowers, not daylight, not even entire forests. And yet nature does not seem troubled by this reality. It builds temporary beauty constantly, knowing it will change again. Cherry blossoms may bloom for only a short time before wind carries them away. Morning dew evaporates within hours after sunrise. Certain desert flowers open for a single night and close forever by morning. Nature creates fragile things repeatedly without requiring permanence, and perhaps human beings find this calming because much of life also exists in passing moments rather than fixed states. A summer evening, a familiar scent after rain, a particular sunset reflected through trees. These experiences feel meaningful partly because they cannot be held permanently. Even clouds demonstrate this quiet impermanence. The atmosphere is never still. Air masses shift continuously across the planet, carrying moisture, heat, dust, pollen, salt, and microscopic particles through enormous invisible systems. The cloud you see overhead has likely traveled through many environments already. Ocean water evaporates, forms clouds, falls as rain, moves through rivers, returns to oceans. The same water molecules may pass repeatedly through forests, glaciers, animals, storms, and human bodies over vast stretches of time. In a sense, Earth continuously reuses itself, and the natural world is filled with these hidden continuities. The oxygen produced by ancient forests still circulates through the atmosphere. Tiny particles from deserts may eventually settle across distant oceans. Nutrients from long-dead organisms become part of future ecosystems. Nothing remains isolated for very long. Even human breath participates in larger cycles. Every inhale contains atoms that have existed for billions of years. Some of the oxygen entering your lungs tonight may once have moved through ancient trees, prehistoric oceans, or clouds drifting over landscapes that no longer exist. There is something deeply grounding in realizing how physically connected life truly is, not symbolically, literally. And spring often makes this interconnectedness easier to notice, because so much becomes visibly active again. Insects emerge, roots spread, birds build nests, rivers swell with snowmelt, pollen drifts through the air in enormous quantities. Entire ecosystems restart complex relationships almost simultaneously. A single apple tree, for example, may support hundreds of species throughout a season. Bees gather nectar from blossoms. Birds eat insects living among branches. Fungi interact with roots underground. Moss grows along bark surfaces. Fallen fruit feeds animals and soil organisms later in the year. One tree becomes an entire living system, and this complexity develops quietly, without instruction, without central control. Nature organizes itself through countless small interactions unfolding continuously over time. Even grasslands, which many people consider simple landscapes, contain astonishingly dense networks of life. A healthy meadow may support insects, fungi, birds, rodents, pollinators, bacteria, and deeply interconnected root systems beneath the soil. In some grasslands, root structures extend farther underground than the visible plants extend above ground. The hidden portion is larger than the visible portion. This happens often in nature. The deeper structures remain unseen, and perhaps that idea resonates psychologically because many important human processes are invisible too. Memory forms quietly. Habits develop gradually. Healing often happens beneath immediate awareness. Change may begin internally long before it becomes visible externally. Nature reflects this pattern constantly. And then there is wind. Wind is one of the few natural forces humans cannot see directly, only through its effects. Leaves move, water ripples, tall grass bends in waves, clouds drift across the sky, but the wind itself remains invisible. Throughout spring and summer, shifting temperatures create changing pressure systems that move air across enormous distances. Warm air rises, cooler air flows inward. Oceans and land heat differently, generating continuous circulation around the planet. The atmosphere is always moving. Even stillness usually contains motion, too subtle to notice immediately. And perhaps this is why breezes feel calming to many people. Moving air provides sensory evidence that the environment remains active and alive without demanding attention aggressively. A soft wind through trees creates endless variation without becoming chaotic. No two gusts sound exactly alike. No leaf pattern repeats perfectly. Nature continuously generates gentle unpredictability. The human mind appears to enjoy this balance between order and variation. Ocean waves behave similarly. Waves repeat rhythmically, but never identically. Their timing changes slightly, their shape shifts. Water reflects light differently each moment, predictable enough to feel safe, variable enough to remain interesting. This may be one reason people can watch rain, fire, rivers, or waves for long periods without boredom. These patterns occupy attention lightly while avoiding rigid repetition. The brain relaxes into them. Even thunderstorms, despite their power, often contain strangely calming elements when experienced from safety. Distant thunder rolls slowly across the atmosphere because sound waves reflect and scatter through layers of air and landscape. Rainfall creates overlapping textures of sound. Wind pressure changes subtly before storms arrive. The environment announces transition gradually, and after storms pass, the atmosphere often feels unusually clear because rainfall removes particles from the air. Sunlight may appear sharper, colors seem more vivid, temperatures soften, nature resets itself repeatedly. Forests, after rain, are especially rich with sensory detail. Damp soil releases stronger scents. Moss absorbs moisture rapidly. Small streams become louder. Water droplets collect along leaves and spider webs, briefly turning ordinary surfaces reflective. Tiny temporary worlds appear everywhere after rainfall. And perhaps one of the most relaxing things about observing nature carefully is realizing how much detail exists beyond ordinary attention. A single leaf contains branching vein systems resembling rivers viewed from above. Snowflakes form geometric structures through molecular physics. Tree rings store environmental history year by year. Bird feathers contain microscopic arrangements that affect color and insulation. Even seemingly simple things are extraordinarily intricate when observed slowly enough. Nature rewards patience. The faster someone moves through it, the less becomes visible. But when attention slows, complexity expands everywhere. This may partly explain why long walks in natural settings often feel mentally restorative. Slowness aligns perception more closely with the pace at which natural details reveal themselves. A fast-moving mind misses subtle things. The shape of shadows shifting through leaves, the layered calls of birds at dusk, the gradual cooling of evening air, the first appearance of stars before full darkness. Nature rarely forces these experiences. It offers them quietly, and perhaps that gentleness matters, because much of modern life is built around urgency, alerts, acceleration, and constant stimulation. Human attention is pulled rapidly between tasks, screens, sounds, and obligations, but forests do not send notifications. Mountains do not rush conversations. Rain does not demand productivity. Natural environments continue existing without asking anything from the observer, and sometimes that absence of demand becomes deeply restful. Tonight, somewhere on Earth, spring flowers are still opening in darkness beneath moonlight. Somewhere, warm summer wind is moving across tall grass in slow waves. Somewhere, autumn forests are releasing leaves one by one into cold evening air. The planet continues its endless seasonal motion with extraordinary calm, carrying every living thing quietly forward through another night beneath the turning sky. If you watch a river long enough, you begin to notice that water almost never moves in straight lines. It curves, it folds around obstacles, it slows in some places and accelerates in others. Even the smoothest-looking stream contains countless tiny currents shifting beneath the surface. Nature often chooses adaptation over resistance. A river does not become frustrated by a stone in its path. Over time, it simply moves around it, or slowly reshapes it through persistence. And rivers reshape far more than people usually realize. Over long enough periods, flowing water carves valleys, transports nutrients, creates wetlands, and builds entire landscapes grain by grain. Some of the calmest rivers on Earth were once violent glacial floods thousands of years ago. Gentle things can still possess immense power when given enough time. This is another quiet lesson repeated constantly in nature. Time matters more than force. A forest does not appear instantly. A canyon does not form in a year. Even soil, something most people rarely think about, develops through astonishingly slow processes involving rock breakdown, fungal activity, moisture cycles, bacteria, roots, insects, and decomposing organic matter. A single tablespoon of healthy soil may contain billions of microorganisms. Entire, invisible ecosystems exist beneath every footstep outdoors, and these hidden systems are constantly active. Bacteria recycling nutrients, fungi exchanging minerals with plant roots, earthworms aerating the ground, seeds waiting for the right combination of moisture, temperature, and light. The earth beneath you is never truly still. Spring simply makes this activity easier to notice. After winter, frozen ground softens. Water begins moving more freely through soil layers. Roots resume growth, insects emerge from dormant states, and suddenly landscapes that appeared quiet reveal enormous biological movement underneath. There is something deeply reassuring about how much life continues outside human awareness. Forests continue growing whether anyone visits them or not. Wildflowers bloom in empty fields unseen by most people. Rain falls across oceans at night far from cities. The natural world does not require observation to continue existing, and perhaps that realization can feel strangely peaceful. Not everything depends on constant human involvement. The seasons unfold on their own. Even the sky participates in seasonal transformation. Spring skies often appear softer, partly because of increased atmospheric moisture and changing sun angles. Summer skies can look intensely blue because sunlight scatters differently through warmer, clearer air. Autumn light becomes lower and more golden as the sun's path shifts gradually toward winter. The color of the world changes because Earth tilts. An entire planet leaning slightly in space creates seasonal emotion, harvest cycles, migration patterns, flowering periods, and the psychological atmosphere people associate with different times of year. So much of human experience is shaped by astronomical geometry few people consciously think about, and still, the body responds. People often feel different in autumn without fully understanding why. Different in spring. Different during long summer evenings. Light enters the eyes, signals the brain, alters hormones, shifts mood and alertness. The connection between humans and seasons remains continuous even inside modern environments. And perhaps the quietest moments of the year are the transitions between one state and another. Early morning before birds fully begin singing, the first cool evening after a long summer. The moment leaves begin changing color, the silence just after snowfall. Nature contains many thresholds, and thresholds often feel emotionally significant because they remind people that nothing remains fixed forever. Even coastlines are temporary. Waves reshape shorelines continuously. Sand moves with tides and storms. Barrier islands shift slowly across decades. Cliffs erode grain by grain under rain, wind, and salt water. Land itself changes gradually beneath human timelines. Mountains rise and wear down. Forests spread and retreat. Glaciers carve valleys over thousands of years. The Earth is dynamic even when it appears stable. And maybe this is part of why natural environments can reduce mental tension. Nature does not pretend permanence exists. It demonstrates change constantly, but without panic. Leaves fall calmly. Tides rise predictably. Sunsets arrive without resistance. The world transforms continuously while remaining strangely balanced. There is also something calming about the efficiency of natural systems. Very little is unused for long. Dead trees become habitats for insects, birds, fungi, and moss. Volcanic ash eventually enriches soil. Burned forests often regenerate with surprising speed, because certain ecosystems evolved specifically around periodic fire. Some pine species release seeds only after exposure to extreme heat. Destruction and renewal are not always opposites in nature. Sometimes they are connected stages of the same cycle. And throughout summer and autumn especially, the natural world becomes full of preparation. Animals gather food, trees store nutrients, birds begin migration routes, even insects respond to changing daylight lengths and temperature signals. Tiny environmental changes trigger enormous behavioral shifts across ecosystems. A few minutes less daylight each evening can alter flowering patterns, migration timing, and reproductive cycles. The living world is listening constantly, and humans listen too. Often unconsciously, many people begin slowing down emotionally during autumn. Evening darkness arrives earlier. Temperatures cool. Social behavior subtly changes. Seasonal atmosphere shapes thought in quiet ways. Perhaps this is why certain memories remain attached to particular seasons forever. A cold autumn morning, a humid summer night, the scent of spring rain through an open window. Memory often anchors itself to sensory environments more deeply than to exact dates or words. The brain stores experience through texture, temperature, sound, color, and scent, and nature provides these sensory layers continuously. Even silence outdoors is rarely truly silent. There is usually distant wind, insects, moving water, leaves shifting softly, birds calling somewhere far away. Natural silence tends to contain subtle life rather than emptiness, and this may help explain why many people find it less unsettling than artificial silence. A forest at night still feels alive. The world continues breathing around you, and nighttime itself changes dramatically through the seasons. Summer nights often remain active longer. Heat lingers in roads, walls, and soil after sunset. Insects continue moving through warm darkness. Air carries more scent and moisture. Autumn nights feel sharper, clearer, more spacious somehow. Cold air holds less humidity, allowing distant sounds to travel differently. Stars may appear brighter. Fallen leaves gather along sidewalks and forest floors, softening footsteps. Every season reshapes even the experience of darkness. And above all these changing landscapes, Earth continues rotating steadily through space, one complete rotation every 24 hours, one orbit around the sun each year, a rhythm so stable that life evolved entirely around it. Plants open and close according to daylight, animals migrate according to seasonal timing, human sleep cycles synchronize with light and darkness. The planet itself acts almost like a giant clock for living systems, but unlike human clocks, natural time rarely feels aggressive. A sunrise does not rush. An evening does not compete. The seasons arrive gradually enough that people often notice them only after they have already changed. And tonight, somewhere far beyond immediate attention, Another quiet transformation is beginning. A seed absorbing moisture underground, a river carrying mountain snowmelt toward the sea, a tree forming next year's buds months in advance, warm air drifting across nighttime fields, leaves continuing their slow descent through autumn darkness. The earth keeps moving patiently through its endless cycles, holding oceans, forests, weather, light, and living creatures inside one vast, continuous seasonal rhythm. There is a reason people throughout history have watched fire for long periods without becoming tired of it. A campfire never repeats the exact same shape twice. Flames rise, disappear, fold inward, brighten, soften, and shift continuously. The movement is unpredictable, yet contained. Complex yet understandable. Human attention seems naturally drawn toward patterns that change slowly. The same thing happens with rain on windows, waves along shorelines, or leaves moving in wind. These experiences hold the mind gently between order and variation. Too much repetition becomes mechanical. Too much chaos becomes stressful, but nature often exists in a balance between the two. And perhaps this balance is part of what makes seasonal environments feel psychologically calming. Spring rain does not fall identically every second. Summer insects create layered rhythms rather than perfect loops. Autumn wind moves differently through every tree. The world remains dynamic without becoming overwhelming. Even fire itself changes with the seasons. In colder months, humans gather around warmth more intentionally. In summer, sunset arrives later, altering evening routines that have existed for thousands of years. For most of human history, people lived much closer to natural light cycles than they do now. Evening darkness meant slowing down. Winter encouraged conservation of energy. Summer created longer periods for activity and social connection. Modern technology softened these boundaries. But human biology still carries traces of older seasonal behaviors. Researchers studying circadian rhythms have found that the body remains highly sensitive to natural light exposure. Morning sunlight affects alertness, hormone release, metabolism, and sleep timing. Seasonal daylight length can subtly influence emotional states and cognitive patterns. The body continues listening to the sun whether consciously noticed or not. And there is something quietly comforting in realizing that life on Earth still operates through rhythms older than civilization itself. Long before roads, cities, or electricity, sunrise arrived. Bird migration continued. Tides rose and fell. Seeds germinated after rain. The natural world developed enormous systems of timing without human management, and many of those systems remain astonishingly precise. Certain flowers bloom at nearly the same period each year because they respond to exact combinations of temperature and daylight length. Migratory birds may return to remarkably specific locations season after season. Some trees begin preparing for autumn, while summer heat still remains strong. Nature plans ahead constantly. A tree growing leaves in spring is already connected to winter survival months later. Seeds produced during summer may wait until the following year before growing. The future exists quietly inside the present throughout nature, and perhaps that is why seasonal cycles feel emotionally meaningful. They make time visible. Humans usually experience time abstractly through clocks and calendars, but nature expresses time physically through changing light, changing temperature, changing sound, changing color. The year becomes something you can hear in birdsong, smell in rain-soaked soil, feel in cooling evening air. Even shadows change seasonally. During summer, the sun travels higher overhead, creating shorter shadows at midday. In autumn and winter, sunlight arrives at lower angles, stretching shadows across landscapes for longer periods. The geometry of sunlight shapes emotional atmosphere constantly. A late summer afternoon feels different partly because light itself behaves differently. And the emotional effect of light on human perception is surprisingly powerful. Warm evening light often feels calming because longer wavelengths dominate near sunset. Blue light scatters away more easily, leaving softer reds and golds across the sky. The beauty of sunset is partly atmospheric physics experienced emotionally, and perhaps this combination, scientific structure combined with emotional experience, is what makes nature so endlessly fascinating. A snowflake is both mathematics and beauty. Birdsong is both biology and atmosphere. Ocean tides are both gravity and emotion. The natural world operates through physical laws, yet those laws still create experiences humans perceive as peaceful, beautiful, or deeply moving. Even silence after snowfall has a scientific explanation. Fresh snow absorbs sound waves efficiently because of the tiny air pockets trapped between snow crystals. Winter landscapes become quieter, partly because sound itself changes. Nature continuously alters perception in physical ways people often experience emotionally first. And throughout spring, summer, and autumn, scent becomes another powerful seasonal signal. The smell of cut grass, pine forests warmed by sunlight, dry leaves in autumn air, wild flowers after rainfall. Human memory connects strongly to scent because olfactory processing interacts closely with brain regions involved in emotion and memory formation. A single seasonal smell can instantly retrieve experiences from years earlier. And unlike visual memory, scent memory often feels immediate and immersive. Perhaps this is why certain seasons feel emotionally layered long after they pass. They leave traces inside the senses. Even oceans carry seasonal scent changes. Coastal air contains particles of salt, algae, and organic compounds produced partly by marine microorganisms. Forest air may contain phytoncides, chemicals released by trees that researchers believe may influence human stress responses and immune activity. Nature affects the body chemically as well as psychologically. And while modern life often separates humans from direct environmental contact, the nervous system still responds strongly when those connections return. A long walk beneath trees can lower stress markers. Natural soundscapes may improve mental restoration. Exposure to daylight influences sleep quality. These are not abstract ideas. They are biological interactions between organisms and environment. Humans remain deeply ecological creatures even when surrounded by technology. And perhaps remembering this reduces a certain kind of mental loneliness, because it means people are not entirely separate observers standing outside the natural world. They participate in it continuously, breathing oxygen produced by plants and oceans, following circadian rhythms shaped by sunlight. Depending on water cycles, soil systems, temperature regulation, and atmospheric stability, human life is woven into seasonal systems whether acknowledged or not. And still, nature continues largely without urgency. A tree may spend years recovering after drought. Wetlands slowly rebuild after flooding. Coral reefs grow gradually over centuries through countless tiny organisms layering structure piece by piece. The natural world often prioritizes continuity over speed, and this pace can feel deeply calming compared to environments built around acceleration. Nothing in a forest checks the time. Clouds drift without deadlines. Rain falls at the speed gravity allows. The Earth itself rotates steadily, unconcerned with human schedules. Perhaps this is why watching natural processes often softens anxious thinking. Nature rarely hurries, yet enormous things still happen. Mountains erode, forests spread, rivers carve valleys, seasons transform continents. Quiet persistence shapes the world more often than sudden force. And tonight, somewhere beneath spring rain or warm summer air or cooling autumn wind, countless living systems continue their slow work unnoticed. Roots stretching deeper underground, birds navigating by stars, trees exchanging nutrients through hidden fungal networks, ocean currents carrying heat across the planet, leaves preparing to unfold or preparing to fall. The Earth remains endlessly active and endlessly patient at the same time, moving carefully through another season beneath the darkening sky. One of the quietest realities in nature is that most living things spend far more time preparing than performing. A flower blooms briefly, but the plant may spend months gathering energy beforehand. A bird migration that lasts only weeks may depend on seasonal feeding patterns developed over an entire year. Even trees begin forming buds for the following spring, long before winter arrives. Nature invests heavily in unseen preparation, and perhaps this feels comforting because modern life often places overwhelming attention on visible outcomes while ignoring the long, invisible stages that make them possible. Forests understand slow development. So does soil. So do oceans. Nothing important in nature appears instantly. Coral reefs, for example, are built gradually by tiny coral polyps extracting minerals from seawater over enormous stretches of time. Some reefs visible today began forming thousands of years ago. What appears permanent is often the result of countless fragile actions, repeated patiently. The same is true for forests. An old-growth forest is not simply a collection of old trees. It is a layered ecosystem shaped through centuries of storms, fungal growth, decomposition, insect activity, rainfall, sunlight competition, animal movement, and seasonal cycles. Fallen trees create openings in the canopy. Light reaches the forest floor. New plants emerge. Moss spreads across decaying wood. One life supports another continuously. Even death in forests is rarely empty. A fallen tree may continue feeding life for decades after it stops growing. This recycling is one of the most calming patterns repeated throughout nature. Nothing disappears completely without becoming part of something else. Autumn leaves become soil. Soil feeds spring growth. Spring growth supports summer life. Summer abundance prepares autumn migration and seed production. The cycle folds back into itself endlessly, and humans are not outside this process. The calcium in your bones originated in ancient stars long before Earth existed. The water inside your body may once have moved through glaciers, clouds, rivers, oceans, and countless living organisms across millions of years. Life on Earth is deeply shared material moving through different forms. There is something profoundly quiet in that realization, especially at night. Night changes perception in ways many people rarely stop to analyze. Without strong visual detail, the brain pays more attention to sound, temperature, rhythm, and atmosphere. A distant train, wind moving through branches, rain against rooftops, crickets repeating layered patterns from fields. Darkness softens visual complexity, allowing smaller sensory details to emerge. And nature at night often feels older somehow, perhaps because artificial human structures become less visually dominant after sunset. Trees return to silhouette. The sky becomes visible again. Temperature drops reconnect the body to outdoor conditions more directly. Night reminds people that the Earth still exists beyond human activity. Even cities become quieter eventually. Traffic slows, lights disappear room by room. Human systems dim gradually, while oceans continue moving. Insects continue calling, and clouds continue crossing the atmosphere overhead. The planet never truly sleeps. It simply changes, shifts. Some flowers open only at night. Certain desert animals avoid daytime heat entirely. Nocturnal pollinators move through darkness, guided by scent and moonlight. Owls hunt through nearly silent flight, because specialized feather structures reduce sound turbulence around their wings. Even predators in nature often move quietly. The world contains immense activity hidden inside apparent stillness. And perhaps this is why nighttime nature feels emotionally different from daytime nature. The visible world retreats, but the invisible world becomes easier to sense. Temperature changes become noticeable. Humidity becomes noticeable. Distant sounds travel farther through cooler night air. Stars emerge slowly, one by one, as sunlight fully disappears from the atmosphere. And above all of it, space remains unimaginably large and silent. Astronomers estimate there are more stars in the observable universe than grains of sand on Earth. Many of those stars likely contain planets. Some may already be gone, their light still traveling across space long after the original star disappeared. The night sky is partly history arriving late, and strangely, this enormous scale often feels calming rather than frightening, perhaps because it gently reduces the pressure of immediate concerns. Human thoughts can feel extremely large when trapped inside small environments, but beneath open skies, perspective changes. A season lasts months. A tree may live centuries. A mountain range may exist for millions of years. The universe moves at scales beyond ordinary urgency. Nature continuously offers reminders that not every problem must be solved instantly. Some things require waiting. Weather changes gradually. Wounds heal gradually. Forests recover gradually. Even climate patterns emerge across long spans of time through countless interacting systems. Patience is built deeply into the structure of the natural world. And there is another comforting detail about seasons that many people overlook. No season ever arrives completely alone. Even during autumn, traces of summer remain for a while in warm afternoons and lingering insects. Even during spring, Cold mornings still carry memory of winter. Transitions overlap. The world changes softly, rather than through abrupt replacement. Perhaps this is why humans often struggle more with sudden change than gradual change. Nature tends to move through layered transitions instead of instant transformation. Sunsets fade slowly, tides rise slowly, leaves change color gradually, and biological systems seem designed to adapt through rhythm rather than shock. Bird migration follows seasonal cues carefully timed to food availability and temperature shifts. Hibernating animals alter metabolism progressively before winter. Trees slowly reduce water movement as cold approaches. Nature prepares before conditions fully change. And maybe preparation itself is one of the deepest forms of calm, because preparation acknowledges reality without panic. A tree storing nutrients for winter is not afraid of winter. It is simply responding intelligently to cycles larger than itself. The same principle appears everywhere. Seeds waiting underground, animals building shelters, cloud systems gathering moisture before rain. The earth constantly anticipates movement and adjusts accordingly. Even human beings do this biologically. Your body begins producing melatonin before sleep fully arrives. Body temperature shifts ahead of waking. Hormonal cycles follow patterns shaped partly by light exposure and seasonal timing. The nervous system is deeply predictive. Life survives partly through anticipation. And perhaps observing this natural intelligence in the world creates a quiet sense of trust. Not trust that everything will always be easy. Nature is not always gentle. Storms happen, droughts happen, wildfires happen, but ecosystems continue adapting again and again. Persistence matters more than perfection. A forest after fire may appear destroyed at first, yet new growth often begins surprisingly quickly. Certain seeds germinate specifically because heat cracked them open. Nutrients released into soil support future life. Nature rebuilds continuously, not because conditions become permanently stable, but because instability itself is expected. And tonight, somewhere beneath dark forests or quiet fields or cooling ocean air, the living world continues preparing for another morning. Flowers folding closed until sunrise, birds resting before migration resumes, roots drawing moisture silently through soil, clouds gathering beyond distant horizons, the earth turning steadily toward dawn once again, carrying every season forward in its endless patient rhythm. There is something remarkably calming about the way nature repeats itself without ever becoming identical. Every spring contains blossoms, rain, birdsong, and longer days, and yet no two springs are exactly the same. Temperature shifts slightly. Migration timing changes. Different flowers bloom earlier or later depending on rainfall and sunlight. Even the smell of the air changes from year to year. Nature repeats patterns, not exact copies, and perhaps this balance between familiarity and change is deeply important to the human mind. Too much sameness becomes lifeless. Too much unpredictability becomes exhausting. But the seasons move somewhere between those extremes, recognizable, yet always changing. A river remains the same river while carrying completely different water each moment. A forest remains the same forest while constantly shedding leaves, growing roots, decaying, rebuilding, and reshaping itself internally. Life maintains continuity through change rather than despite it. And nowhere is this more visible than in autumn forests. People often focus on the beauty of falling leaves, but fewer think about why leaves fall at all. Leaves are expensive structures for trees to maintain. Water must travel upward continuously. Cells remain vulnerable to freezing damage during winter. Shorter daylight means less energy production through photosynthesis, so trees gradually seal off each leaf at the stem using specialized layers of cells. Nutrients are withdrawn inward. Chlorophyll breaks down. The connection weakens slowly until wind or gravity completes the process. Leaves do not simply die. They are carefully released. Even letting go in nature is organized and deliberate. And there is something deeply peaceful in that image. Because humans often imagine change as sudden collapse when, in reality, many transitions happen gradually and intelligently beneath the surface, long before they become visible. Nature rarely panics during transformation. It adapts methodically, and adaptation may be one of the quietest forms of resilience. Consider migratory birds again. A small bird weighing less than a handful of coins may cross oceans or continents guided by stars, magnetic fields, polarized light, landmarks, and inherited instinct. Some birds travel at night when air conditions are calmer and predators are fewer. Others synchronize migration with seasonal food availability thousands of miles away. Entire journeys unfold according to environmental timing humans barely notice. The sky itself becomes a seasonal pathway, and still, migration is not perfect. Storms interrupt routes, wind patterns shift. Some birds never arrive. Nature contains vulnerability everywhere, yet life continues moving. This persistence without certainty may be one of the most honest things about the natural world. Nothing is guaranteed, but movement continues anyway. Even seeds operate through probability rather than certainty. A tree may release thousands of seeds knowing only a small number will survive long enough to mature. Forests are built partly through abundance and patience. Nature does not expect every attempt to succeed, and perhaps people find relief in this unconsciously. Modern culture often pressures individuals toward constant optimization, constant achievement, constant certainty. But ecosystems thrive through experimentation, diversity, recovery, and adaptation. A meadow survives because many species coexist differently. A forest survives because not all trees respond identically to stress. Variation itself creates resilience, and throughout spring and summer especially, nature becomes filled with enormous diversity of form and behavior. No two clouds hold identical shapes. No two leaves contain identical vein patterns. Snowflakes form differently because each crystal travels through slightly different atmospheric conditions while freezing. Even identical flowers on the same plant may vary subtly in color, size, or timing. Nature avoids rigid perfection. Instead, it creates endless variation inside broader patterns, and this variation gives natural environments their feeling of aliveness. A field of grass moves differently with every wind. Birdsong changes moment to moment. Sunlight through trees never falls the same way twice. The world remains active without becoming mechanically repetitive. There is also something calming about the honesty of seasonal timing. Nature does not rush spring before conditions are ready. A flower cannot bloom permanently. Summer cannot continue endlessly. Autumn arrives because Earth tilts farther from direct sunlight. The seasons obey physical reality quietly and completely, and perhaps this acceptance feels emotionally grounding because human beings often resist change long after conditions have already shifted. Nature rarely does. When daylight shortens, trees respond. When temperatures rise, snow melts. When rain arrives, seeds germinate. The natural world adjusts itself continuously to actual conditions. Even oceans respond immediately to moonlight through tides. The gravitational pull of the moon slightly lifts entire bodies of water across the planet. Coastlines inhale and exhale every day because of celestial motion happening hundreds of thousands of kilometers away. The Earth is connected through systems so large and ancient that human awareness captures only fragments of them, and yet those fragments are enough to create moments of deep calm. Standing beside moving water, listening to rain after midnight, watching evening light fade slowly across distant trees, these experiences often feel meaningful before words fully explain why. Perhaps because the nervous system recognizes patterns older than language itself. For most of human evolution, natural environments shaped survival directly. Water meant life. Healthy forests meant shelter and resources. Seasonal regularity meant predictability and preparation. Human perception evolved inside landscapes, and even now, many people instinctively relax when hearing flowing water, birdsong, or wind through leaves. The body remembers ancient associations. Researchers studying natural soundscapes have found that certain environmental sounds may reduce stress responses and support recovery from mental fatigue. Not because nature is magical, but because human biology developed within these sensory conditions over immense periods of time. You are adapted to seasons more deeply than modern routines sometimes allow you to notice, and perhaps that is why stepping outdoors during spring mornings or autumn evenings can feel strangely clarifying. The body recognizes something familiar: cool air against skin, changing light, earth after rain, the slow movement of clouds overhead. These experiences reconnect attention to physical reality beyond constant abstraction, and nature almost always operates through direct reality. A tree grows toward sunlight, roots move toward moisture, animals follow food, temperature, and safety. There is simplicity beneath the complexity, not easy simplicity, but functional simplicity, life responding to conditions again and again. And tonight, while many people sleep indoors beneath artificial light and insulated walls, the seasons continue shifting quietly outside. Rain may be moving across fields somewhere. Leaves may be turning color in distant forests. Warm ocean currents may be carrying heat across entire continents. Migrating birds may be crossing dark skies guided by stars invisible through city light. The earth continues balancing warmth and cold, growth and rest, light and darkness in one endless rotating cycle that has carried life forward for millions of years. And somewhere in that immense, patient movement, the world remains softly awake. If you look closely at a tree during late autumn, there is a moment when it appears almost suspended between states. Some leaves remain attached, others have already fallen. Branches are partly bare, partly alive with color. The tree seems to exist in transition itself, and perhaps transitions feel emotionally powerful because human life is also filled with them. Not only dramatic changes, but quiet, gradual ones. A season becoming another season. A familiar place changing slowly over years. A memory becoming softer with time. Nature reflects these slow transformations constantly, often so gently that they are difficult to notice while they are happening. Even mountains change this way. To human eyes, mountains appear permanent and unmoving, but wind, water, ice, temperature shifts, and plant roots reshape them continuously. Tiny cracks widen during freezing winters. Rain carries sediment downhill grain by grain. Forests slowly spread across slopes before retreating again after fire or drought. Nothing in nature is completely still, not even stone. And yet, geological change happens so slowly that the landscape can feel timeless. Perhaps this balance between motion and stability is another reason natural environments feel calming. They remind you that change does not always need to be dramatic to be real. A coastline can transform through millions of small waves. A forest can expand through countless quiet seasons. A river can carve rock through persistence rather than force. The earth itself teaches patience through scale. And patience appears everywhere in seasonal life cycles. Some seeds remain dormant for years, waiting for the right conditions. Certain trees produce far more seeds during specific mast years, flooding ecosystems with sudden abundance. Bamboo species may flower only once after decades of growth. Nature is filled with long periods of preparation, interrupted by brief moments of visible transformation. And perhaps humans underestimate how much of life operates this way, because modern systems often emphasize immediate results, while ecosystems reveal that slow accumulation matters enormously. Rain filling underground aquifers, roots deepening each season, layers of fallen leaves becoming rich soil, coral reefs building millimeter by millimeter. Quiet repetition shapes the world constantly. Even weather patterns depend on gradual accumulation. Oceans absorb heat slowly across seasons, influencing storms, rainfall, and atmospheric circulation later. Snowpack in mountains stores water that rivers may release months afterward during warmer seasons. Nature links distant moments together. What happens in spring may shape autumn. What falls during autumn may nourish spring. Nothing exists completely isolated from what came before or what follows afterward. And this interconnected timing extends into human biology too. The body responds to accumulated sunlight exposure, sleep patterns, temperature changes, and seasonal rhythms over time. Emotional states are often influenced by long-term environmental conditions rather than isolated moments. People are seasonal creatures even when they forget it. And perhaps forgetting creates some of the exhaustion of modern life. Artificial environments can flatten natural variation. Climate control reduces temperature awareness. Screens remain bright late into the night. Indoor spaces weaken direct contact with changing daylight, but outside, the seasons continue operating normally. Morning light still shifts across the year. Birds still migrate. Trees still prepare for winter long before snow arrives. The world continues following ancient rhythms, whether humans participate consciously or not. There is something deeply reassuring about that continuity, especially at night. Night has always carried a certain emotional depth for human beings. Darkness reduces distraction and expands awareness of distance. Sounds travel differently. Thoughts often slow or widen beneath open skies, and throughout history, night connected humans more directly to the universe around them. Before electric lighting, stars dominated darkness. People navigated by constellations, measured seasons through celestial movement, watched the moon alter tides and illuminate landscapes. The sky functioned partly as calendar, compass, and storybook all at once. Even now, many seasonal events remain linked closely to astronomy. Spring begins because Earth's axis tilts sunlight differently across hemispheres. Autumn arrives for the same reason. Long summer evenings exist because of orbital geometry unfolding silently through space. The warmth of sunlight on skin is partly the result of a star 93 million miles away releasing energy through nuclear fusion. Nature often feels mystical, not because it lacks explanation, but because the explanations themselves are extraordinary. A sunset is atmospheric scattering, but it is also color spreading across clouds above cooling fields. Bird migration is biology and navigation, but it is also tiny living creatures crossing oceans under moonlight. Rain is condensation and pressure systems, but it is also sound against rooftops after midnight. Science does not reduce the calm beauty of nature. It often deepens it, because understanding reveals how many invisible systems cooperate continuously to create ordinary moments. Even a simple forest contains astonishing coordination. Trees competing for light while also exchanging nutrients underground, fungi decomposing fallen wood into future soil, birds distributing seeds across large distances, insects pollinating flowers during short seasonal windows, rainfall cycling moisture upward from oceans into clouds and back into rivers again. The world is constantly moving matter, energy, water, heat, and life through interconnected loops, and remarkably, much of this movement happens quietly. A tree grows silently, snow falls silently, fog forms silently across fields before dawn. Nature rarely announces its most important processes dramatically. Perhaps that is why observing nature carefully often encourages a quieter kind of attention. Not the sharp attention demanded by alarms and notifications, but softer observation, watching shadows move, listening to distant thunder, noticing how evening air cools gradually after sunset. These small observations reconnect awareness to continuous physical reality rather than endless abstraction. And physical reality often moves more slowly than anxious thought. Clouds do not rush across the sky because humans feel impatient. Rivers do not speed up because someone checks the time. The earth rotates steadily, regardless of human urgency. Perhaps one reason natural environments can feel mentally restorative is because they expose people to systems operating independently of personal stress. The seasons continue. Rain falls, leaves emerge and disappear. Stars cross the night sky. Life moves through cycles larger than individual concerns, not in a cold or indifferent way, but in a stabilizing way. The world remains active and alive beyond immediate human problems. And tonight, somewhere beyond city lights and sleeping houses, spring flowers may still be opening beneath moonlit rain. Somewhere, warm summer wind may be carrying the scent of grass across dark fields. Somewhere, autumn forests may be releasing leaves into rivers moving slowly toward the sea. The earth continues turning through darkness with extraordinary calm, carrying oceans, forests, weather, animals, and human dreams together into another quiet morning. If you follow the idea of seasons long enough, you begin to notice something subtle beneath them. They are not just changes in weather. They are changes in behavior, changes in rhythm, changes in attention. In spring, life expands outward. In summer, it reaches fullness. In autumn, it turns inward. And in winter, it slows into preservation. Even without thinking about it, human life tends to echo these patterns in small ways. Energy rises and falls. Focus sharpens and softens. Social activity increases and then retreats. The body, in its own quiet language, mirrors the external world, and nature does not seem to resist this rhythm. It participates in it fully. A forest in spring does not hesitate before growing leaves. A river in summer does not question its own flow. A field in autumn does not stop itself from drying and transforming color. Nature does not pause to judge its own cycles. It simply moves through them. And perhaps that is one of the most quietly calming ideas embedded in seasonal life. There is no need for resistance where change is already part of structure. Even what appears to be stillness is usually just slower motion. Snow resting on branches is water in a different form. Ice covering lakes is liquid paused by temperature. Dormant seeds are life held in suspension, not absence. The appearance of stopping is often just another phase of continuing, and this becomes especially clear when winter gives way to spring. At first, nothing seems different. The air is still cold. Ground remains firm. Branches remain bare. But beneath the surface, enormous shifts are already underway. Sunlight lengthens by minutes each day. Soil begins to soften microscopically. Water starts moving again through frozen systems. Roots slowly reawaken. Change begins long before it becomes visible. And when the first green appears, it feels sudden only because the earlier stages were invisible. Nature often works this way. Transformation is gradual until it reaches a threshold. Then it becomes noticeable all at once. A flower opening overnight, a forest turning green in days, a landscape shifting color in a short span of weeks. But the preparation was never sudden, only the visibility was. And this pattern repeats across almost every ecosystem. Even deserts, which appear static, are constantly adjusting beneath the surface. Wind slowly reshapes dunes. Rare rainfall triggers bursts of life that remain dormant for long periods. Temperature shifts influence animal movement and plant survival in subtle ways. Stillness in nature is rarely empty. It is just quiet emotion. And perhaps this is why natural environments feel so different from human-made ones. They do not present a false sense of completion. They remain in process, always becoming, always adjusting. Even mountains, which seem like symbols of permanence, are slowly changing shape across timescales too large to easily perceive. Wind erodes rock grain by grain. Rainwater follows microscopic cracks. Ice expands and contracts within stone, widening fractures over centuries. Vegetation grows into crevices, gradually altering structure. What appears eternal is actually extremely slow transformation. And this slow transformation is not chaotic. It is patterned, consistent, predictable in its direction even when details vary. That is another quiet characteristic of seasons as well. They are not random. They are structured cycles shaped by the tilt and orbit of the planet. Earth leans slightly as it moves around the sun, and that simple geometric fact creates immense variation in light, temperature, growth, and behavior across the surface of the world. Spring is not separate from autumn. Summer is not separate from winter. They are all expressions of one continuous movement of a planet in space. And when you step back far enough, even that movement becomes part of a larger rhythm. Day and night, tides rising and falling, moons orbiting planets, planets orbiting stars, stars orbiting galaxies, everything in motion, but not in haste, in structure, in balance, in repetition that never repeats exactly. And within that larger movement, life on Earth develops its own smaller cycles. Birds returning to familiar regions year after year. Fish migrating through ocean currents. Insects responding to temperature and light. Plants adjusting growth based on rainfall and daylight. Human beings sensing seasonal shifts in energy and mood without always realizing why. These patterns are layered inside each other. A forest contains thousands of smaller cycles. A meadow contains millions. An ocean contains billions. And the planet itself contains them all at once. Still, even within this complexity, There is simplicity in the way change unfolds. Nothing in nature requires perfection to continue. A tree does not need perfect weather to grow. A river does not require perfect conditions to flow. A season does not depend on exact outcomes to arrive. Life persists through variation, through imbalance, through recovery, and through adaptation. And perhaps this is where the calm feeling of nature becomes most noticeable, not in ideal conditions, but in continuity. The world keeps moving forward even when individual moments feel uncertain or uneven. A cloudy spring still becomes summer. A dry summer still becomes autumn. A harsh winter still becomes spring again. The cycle continues without needing to be perfect, and somewhere in that continuity, there is a kind of stability that does not depend on control. It depends only on persistence. Even sound in nature reflects this idea. Birdsong is not uniform. It changes with time of day, season, and environment. Wind is never identical between two moments. Rain varies in intensity and rhythm. The ocean never repeats the same wave twice. Yet all of these variations belong to recognizable patterns, order within change, structure within unpredictability. And perhaps the human mind responds deeply to that combination, because it resembles how thought itself works. Ideas form, shift, fade, and return. Memories appear and dissolve. Attention moves between focus and drift. Conscious experience is never completely fixed. It flows, and nature reflects that same flow in external form. So when someone sits quietly near moving water or beneath changing sky, there may be a subtle alignment between internal rhythm and external rhythm, not identical, but compatible. The mind does not have to adjust itself to something unnatural. It simply recognizes something familiar in motion, and that recognition can feel like calmness. Not because everything stops, but because nothing is forcing itself. Everything is allowed to move at its own pace, and tonight, across the planet, that movement continues without interruption. Cold air settling into valleys, warm air rising above oceans, seeds resting beneath soil, forests breathing slowly through leaves and roots, rivers carrying distant snow toward the sea, stars continuing their long, silent paths across the sky. The seasons turning not as events happening to the world, but as the world itself continuing its steady, patient unfolding through space and time. If you continue following the seasons far enough, you begin to notice that they do not truly have sharp boundaries. There is no exact moment when spring becomes summer, no precise second when autumn turns into winter. Instead, there are gradients, gradual shifts in light, slow changes in temperature, subtle adjustments in behavior across plants and animals. Even human perception struggles to define the exact turning points, and perhaps that uncertainty is part of what makes seasonal change feel so natural. Nature rarely operates in sharp divisions. It prefers transitions. Morning does not become noon instantly. Day does not become night immediately. Even a single hour contains shifting light, shifting sound, shifting temperature. Everything is already in motion before it becomes noticeable. And this continuous motion is one of the most consistent features of the natural world. A forest is never fully still. Even when there is no wind, leaves adjust slightly due to temperature differences. Insects move quietly beneath bark and soil. Water travels through roots and stems in slow internal cycles. A tree appears stationary only because its movement is measured in time spans far larger than human perception. And when you extend that idea outward, the entire Earth becomes a system of slow movement, layered upon faster movement. Clouds shift within hours, seasons shift within months, ocean currents shift across years, climate patterns shift across decades, landforms shift across centuries and millennia, and yet all of it is part of a single continuous process. Nothing is separate. Even what feels like stillness is part of movement at a different scale. A stone resting in a field is still part of erosion, weathering, and geological change. A frozen lake is still part of water cycles that will continue when temperatures rise. A dormant seed is still part of future growth already contained within its structure. Nature does not truly pause. It only changes tempo, and that idea extends into seasonal life in quiet ways. In spring, tempo increases, growth accelerates, color returns, sound expands. In summer, tempo reaches fullness. Activity is at its widest expression. Life is outward, visible, active. In autumn, tempo begins to slow. Energy shifts inward. Preparation becomes more important than expansion. And in winter, tempo compresses further into preservation, rest, conservation, quiet continuation. But nothing disappears from the system entirely. Everything is carried forward into the next phase. Even fallen leaves continue participating in the cycle by breaking down into soil. Even bare branches are holding future buds within them long before they appear. Even winter darkness is part of the timing that makes spring possible. Each phase contains the next one in a hidden form, and this continuity is one of the most consistent truths in nature. There is no final ending within the cycle itself, only transformation. And transformation often happens beneath awareness, before it becomes visible. In early spring, before flowers appear, the soil already holds rising biological activity. Microorganisms become more active as temperatures shift slightly. Water moves differently through frozen and thawing ground. Roots begin extending gradually. From the surface, nothing may look changed, but internally, everything is adjusting. And this hidden preparation is repeated in almost every ecosystem. Even deserts, which appear quiet for long periods, respond rapidly when conditions shift. A brief rainfall can activate seeds that have waited years. Within days, landscapes can transform into fields of color and movement that disappear again just as quickly. Life is often waiting beneath conditions rather than absent from them. And perhaps that idea changes how stillness itself is perceived. Stillness is not always emptiness. It can be readiness, a pause that contains potential rather than absence. And throughout nature, this pattern repeats constantly. Winter trees are not empty trees. They are prepared trees. Dormant fields are not dead fields. They are resting systems. Quiet lakes are not inactive water bodies. They are balanced systems waiting for seasonal input, and even oceans follow similar rhythms. Surface temperatures change with sunlight. Marine life adjusts migration and breeding patterns accordingly. Phytoplankton bloom in response to light and nutrients, forming the base of vast food chains that support everything above them. What appears simple is often deeply structured, and what appears still is often deeply active. This duality appears again and again in seasonal transitions. A quiet landscape is not necessarily inactive. It may simply be operating at a slower, visible rate, and human perception, shaped by fast-moving environments, often overlooks these slower layers. But when attention shifts even slightly, the complexity becomes easier to notice. A branch swaying subtly in still air, a cloud reshaping itself almost imperceptibly, a shadow moving across ground as the sun lowers, a bird briefly crossing a distant horizon, small movements that reveal continuous change. And when these small movements are observed together, they form a larger pattern. The world is always moving, even when it feels still, even when it looks unchanged. And perhaps there is a quiet comfort in that realization, because it means nothing is truly stuck. Nothing is permanently frozen in one state. Everything is part of a larger process of becoming. Even human experience follows this pattern. Thoughts shift, emotions shift, perception shifts, memory shifts over time, softening or reorganizing depending on new experiences. Nothing internal remains completely fixed either. And just like seasons, these changes often happen gradually enough that they are only noticed in hindsight. A mood that slowly lifted, a perspective that slowly changed, a worry that gradually lost intensity. Like weather, internal states often move in patterns rather than sudden shifts, and nature reflects that again and again. Rain does not appear instantly from clear skies without atmospheric preparation. Storm systems build over time through pressure differences and moisture accumulation. Even calm weather is part of larger cycles of movement and balance. And above all of this, Earth continues its steady rotation, day turning into night, night turning into day, seasons unfolding as the planet moves through space, a slow, consistent rhythm that has remained unchanged for billions of years. And within that rhythm, every living system participates in its own way. Trees responding to light, animals responding to temperature, rivers responding to gravity and terrain, clouds responding to atmospheric pressure, and human beings responding, often unconsciously, to all of it at once. Breathing, sleeping, waking, feeling, adapting, continuing. And tonight, as another cycle moves forward without interruption, the world remains in motion. Not loudly, not suddenly, but steadily. Through forests, across oceans, beneath soil and above mountains, the seasons continue their quiet passage, carrying every form of life through another gentle turning of the earth. If you follow the seasons far enough, you begin to notice that even change itself has a rhythm. It does not arrive evenly. It gathers, then it releases. Spring does not distribute warmth in a perfectly steady way. It arrives in pulses: warm days, cold nights, sudden rains, brief returns of chill air. Summer does not remain constant either. Heat rises and falls in waves. Storms interrupt calm skies. Even the longest sunny days carry variation hour by hour. Autumn, too, does not fade in a straight line. One week may feel unchanged, and then suddenly the color shifts, the air sharpens, the light lowers, and winter often feels like a long pause that still contains hidden movement beneath the surface. So what appears as 4 distinct seasons is actually a continuous flow with changing intensity, a curve, not a set of steps. And the Earth itself moves in a similar way. Its orbit around the Sun is not perfectly circular but slightly elliptical. Its tilt remains steady, but the angle of sunlight reaching different regions changes continuously, not abruptly. This creates gradients of light and warmth that slowly shape everything living on the surface. Nothing about it is instantaneous. Everything is gradual enough that life can respond. And life does respond. Plants do not wait for permission. They respond to light, to warmth, of K to moisture, to chemistry. A seed in soil does not decide to grow in a conscious sense. It responds to conditions reaching a threshold. Water activates enzymes. Stored energy begins converting into growth. Cells divide. A root emerges downward before a stem rises upward. The direction itself is already encoded. Down into darkness for stability. Up toward light for energy. Even before the plant is visible, the logic of its movement is already in place, and this pattern repeats everywhere in nature. Responses shaped by environment, not urgency, not hesitation, just alignment. Even animals follow similar seasonal alignment. Birds do not migrate randomly. Their timing is linked to daylight length, food availability, and internal biological clocks. Many species begin preparing for migration weeks before the journey starts, adjusting metabolism, increasing fat reserves, shifting behavior patterns. A visible journey is preceded by invisible preparation, and this is one of the most consistent themes in seasonal life. What you see is never the beginning. It is the midpoint of a longer process. Even rain follows this structure. A storm you observe is the visible stage of a system that began forming far earlier. Warm air rising, moisture accumulating, pressure systems shifting across large distances. By the time you hear rain on a roof, the atmosphere has already been reorganizing itself for hours or even days. Nature is always ahead of observation, and this creates a subtle mismatch in human perception. People often feel as though change is sudden because they only notice the visible moment of it. But nature rarely works in suddenness. It works in accumulation, and accumulation is quiet. Forests grow this way, not in leaps, but in layers. A ring added each year inside a tree trunk, a thin layer of soil formed by decayed leaves, a small expansion of canopy space when one tree falls and another fills the gap. A forest is a record of slow additions stacked over time, and when you look at it this way, even stillness becomes meaningful. A winter forest is not paused. It is compressed into another form of activity: water stored, energy conserved, structures maintained. Life continues, but differently. And perhaps that is the deeper truth behind seasonal calmness. Nature does not stop. It reorganizes, and reorganization is often quieter than action. There is also something important in how nature treats time itself. Time in natural systems is not linear in the way humans often imagine it. It is cyclical, recursive, overlapping. A spring is not just a beginning. It is also the result of a previous cycle completing. An autumn is not just an ending. It is also the preparation for the next beginning. Winter is not absence. It is storage, And summer is not permanence. It is peak expression before transition. Every season contains the memory of the last and the anticipation of the next. And because of that, nothing in nature truly exists alone in time. Even a single leaf contains a timeline. It begins as a bud formed months earlier. It grows through spring. It functions through summer. It changes in autumn, and it returns to soil in winter. That leaf is not an object. It is a process, and this idea extends outward into entire ecosystems. Rivers carry sediment from mountains to oceans, shaping deltas that will slowly become land again over time. Ocean currents redistribute heat across the planet, stabilizing climates that allow forests to exist far inland. Wind moves pollen across vast distances, connecting plant populations that never directly interact. Everything is linked through movement. Even stillness is part of that movement. Because stillness in nature is never absolute. It is relative. A lake that appears still on the surface contains constant microscopic motion. Temperature layers shift slowly. Aquatic organisms move beneath reflection. Nutrients circulate invisibly. The surface is only one expression of a deeper system. And when you begin to understand this, even quiet environments feel alive in a different way. A silent field is not empty. It is resting in transition. A dark sky is not void. It is full of motion too distant to see in real time. A quiet forest is not inactive. It is operating on a slower rhythm. And perhaps that is where the calming effect begins. Not in absence of activity, but in the presence of activity that does not demand attention. Nature does not compete for attention. It simply continues, and continuing is enough. Even light participates in this quiet continuity. Sunlight does not arrive all at once across the planet. It moves steadily as Earth rotates. Morning appears in one region while evening settles in another. Somewhere, dawn is always beginning. Somewhere, night is always deepening. The planet is never fully in one state. It is always transitioning somewhere, and this constant transition creates the global rhythm of life. Plants opening with sunrise, animals adjusting activity patterns, humans waking, resting, traveling, adapting. The entire surface of Earth is in coordinated motion without central instruction, and still, it remains balanced. That balance is not rigid. It is flexible, responsive, self-adjusting. Storms pass, heat waves pass, cold fronts pass, and after each, systems reorganize again. Nothing stays disrupted forever, not in the long view of nature. And perhaps that is why seasonal awareness can feel grounding. It introduces a sense of continuity that is larger than immediate experience, a reminder that even difficult or intense conditions are part of a cycle that continues beyond them. Spring always follows winter. Rain always returns after drought. Light always shifts again after darkness. Not in a promise-like way, but in a structural way, a pattern built into the planet itself. And tonight, as Earth continues its steady movement through space, that pattern remains active everywhere at once. In soil, slowly warming beneath the first signs of spring. In forests, shifting color under autumn light. In oceans, carrying heat across continents. In winds, circling quietly above sleeping landscapes. And in every living system responding, without pause, to the quiet unfolding of another season. If you stay with the idea of seasons long enough, something subtle begins to change in how you understand time itself. It stops feeling like a straight line moving forward and starts feeling more like a layered movement, something that returns, but never exactly the same. Spring returns, but not the same spring. The same trees bloom, but with different weather, different light, different timing. Even the air carries a slightly different memory each year, and yet the structure remains recognizable. This balance between repetition and variation is one of the most consistent patterns in nature. Nothing truly repeats in an identical way, but nothing is ever completely lost either. Even winter contains the shape of past winters within it. Even summer carries echoes of previous summers in temperature patterns, wind behavior, and daylight length. Nature is not a collection of separate moments. It is a continuous unfolding, and this unfolding is rarely dramatic in the way human attention expects. It is gradual, almost patient. A tree does not announce that it is growing. It simply adds layers internally, year after year. A river does not declare that it is shaping land. It simply continues flowing. And yet, over time, those small continuations become visible changes. Mountains are carved, valleys are formed, forests shift location over centuries, coastlines slowly redraw themselves. What looks permanent is actually the result of countless small, almost invisible movements, and perhaps that is one of the quietest truths embedded in seasonal thinking. The most powerful changes are often the least noticeable while they are happening. Spring does not arrive in a single moment. It arrives in signals: a slight change in morning light, a shift in wind direction, a gradual softening of soil, bird activity increasing almost imperceptibly. At first, nothing seems different, and then suddenly, everything feels different. Not because change happened instantly, but because it crossed a threshold of awareness. And that threshold is important, because much of nature operates beneath immediate perception. The soil beneath a forest floor is alive with movement most of the time. Fungi spread through networks that connect roots across large distances. Nutrients move through microscopic pathways. Bacteria break down organic material continuously. To a human observer, the ground may look still, but internally, it is constantly active. This hidden activity is one of the defining features of natural systems. What appears simple on the surface is often extremely complex underneath. Even a patch of grass contains layered systems of growth, competition, decay, and renewal happening simultaneously. Some blades grow, some wither, some are eaten, some regrow. And through it all, the system continues without interruption. Seasons simply make these processes more visible. In spring, growth dominates visibility. In summer, stability and abundance are more noticeable. In autumn, transition becomes visible. In winter, reduction and conservation become dominant. But at no point does the system stop functioning. It only shifts emphasis. And this idea of shifting emphasis rather than stopping is deeply embedded in natural cycles. Even animal behavior reflects it. Many species do not simply become inactive during winter. They change strategy. Some reduce activity, some migrate, some enter states of lowered metabolic function, some adjust feeding patterns and social behavior. The form changes, but the continuity remains. And in that sense, nature is always adaptive rather than static. It does not require perfect conditions to continue existing. It responds to whatever conditions are present: rain, heat, cold, wind, drought, abundance, scarcity. Each condition becomes part of the system rather than an interruption of it. And this is especially visible in transitional seasons. Spring and autumn are not stable states. They are movement itself. Spring moves from cold toward warmth. Autumn moves from warmth toward cold. They are not destinations. They are directions. And perhaps that is why they often feel emotionally rich. They contain a sense of unfolding, a sense that something is in progress rather than complete. Even sound behaves differently during these transitions. In spring, sound expands. Birdsong becomes more layered. Wind carries more movement through open branches. Water from melting snow adds constant background flow. In autumn, sound becomes sharper in some places and softer in others. Dry leaves change the texture of footsteps. Air becomes thinner, allowing distant sounds to carry differently. In winter, sound often feels more contained. In summer, it feels more distributed. Each season has its own acoustic identity, and the human mind often responds to these changes without conscious analysis. You feel them before you describe them, and light is perhaps the most influential of all seasonal signals, not just in intensity, but in angle. Spring light feels different from summer light because it travels through the atmosphere differently depending on the sun's position. Autumn light often has a lower angle, creating longer shadows and softer contrasts. Winter light can feel distant and quiet even during daytime. These changes influence perception in subtle ways. Colors appear differently. Depth feels different. Even time of day feels altered. And all of this is happening continuously while life continues underneath it. Plants adjusting growth rates, animals adjusting behavior, humans adjusting routines without explicit instruction. And above it all, the Earth continues its rotation, ensuring that no single state ever remains permanent. Day always becomes night. Night always becomes day. Warmth always shifts toward coolness. Coolness always shifts toward warmth. The cycle continues without exception, and within that cycle, Everything finds its place temporarily. Nothing is fixed, but nothing is isolated either. Even storms are part of the cycle. They redistribute energy. They reshape temperature patterns. They bring moisture to places that need it. They clear atmosphere. They reset conditions in ways that allow future growth. What feels disruptive is often also part of renewal, and this duality appears throughout nature. Destruction and creation are not always separate processes. They often overlap. A fallen tree becomes habitat. A burned forest becomes fertile ground. A storm becomes part of climate balance. Even what seems like ending often contains beginning within it. And perhaps this is one of the most deeply calming aspects of seasonal thinking. It does not divide the world into permanent loss and permanent gain. It shows continuous transformation. Nothing disappears entirely. Nothing remains unchanged forever. Everything participates in movement, and that movement is consistent enough to trust, but variable enough to remain alive. So when you observe a season closely, what you are really observing is not just weather or temperature. You are observing a system in motion, a planet adjusting itself, a living world responding to light, a continuous exchange between energy, matter, time, and life. And tonight, that exchange continues quietly, across oceans and continents, through forests and fields, above mountains and cities. The earth keeps turning, the atmosphere keeps shifting, the seasons keep unfolding, not as separate events, but as one continuous, patient process that never stops moving forward. If you extend your attention further into the idea of seasons, you begin to notice something even quieter beneath all of it. The world does not just change through seasons. It learns through them, not in a conscious way, but in a structural one. Each cycle leaves behind small adjustments that shape the next. So spring is never simply a return. It is a return with memory. So is summer. So is autumn. Even winter carries traces of what came before it. So every year is slightly different, even if the pattern feels familiar. And this is how nature builds complexity without losing stability, through repetition that is never exact, through cycles that never fully reset. A forest is a good example of this kind of learning. After a warm season, certain plants may spread more successfully. After a dry season, others may become dominant. After storms, light gaps open in the canopy, allowing different species to grow. Over time, the forest is shaped by accumulated conditions, not one single event, but many small events layered together. And this layering is what gives ecosystems their depth. Even soil carries this kind of memory. Each season adds and removes material. Leaves fall, decompose, and integrate. Roots grow deeper or shift direction depending on moisture and temperature. Microorganisms respond to changing conditions continuously. What appears to be ground is actually a long record of interaction between time and life, and this record is always active, never finished. Even rivers behave like living records of change. They remember rainfall patterns through flow. They remember seasons through volume. They remember terrain through erosion. A river is never the same river twice, yet it maintains identity through continuity of movement. And that paradox exists throughout nature. Consistency through change, identity through transformation. And this is perhaps one of the quiet reasons seasonal life feels psychologically stabilizing. It shows that stability does not require sameness. It only requires continuity. Even birds understand this continuity in their own way. Migration routes are not random journeys. They are repeated paths refined over generations. Young birds learn timing and direction from environmental cues and inherited behavior patterns. But each year still introduces variation. Wind conditions change, food availability shifts, weather patterns differ. So even a familiar migration is always slightly new. A pattern, but not a repetition. And the same is true for blooming cycles in plants. Some species bloom earlier in response to warming trends. Others delay depending on rainfall or soil conditions. The timing of life is always negotiating with the environment. Nothing is fixed in place. Everything is responsive. And responsiveness is one of the most important characteristics of natural systems. It allows them to continue under changing conditions. Spring itself is not a single uniform event across the planet. It moves gradually across regions. It begins in one hemisphere while another moves toward autumn. Even within a single region, it unfolds unevenly. Lower elevations warm before higher ones. Coastal areas shift before inland regions. South-facing slopes receive more light earlier than shaded valleys. So spring is not a moment, it is a movement across space and time. And you can think of summer and autumn in the same way. They are not boundaries. They are transitions spreading across geography. This is why seasonal change often feels so gradual in daily life. You do not experience it all at once. You experience small differences accumulating over time. A slightly warmer morning, a slightly longer evening, a slightly different sound in the air, and then one day, you realize the season has already changed without announcing itself. It simply arrived through accumulation, and accumulation is one of nature's most powerful forces. A single leaf does not change a forest, but millions of leaves falling every year do. A single rainfall does not reshape a landscape, but repeated rainfall over centuries does. A single seed does not create a forest, but countless seeds over time do. Nature operates through repetition at scale, and scale is what transforms small actions into large outcomes. Even oceans follow this principle. Currents move heat across the planet gradually. Evaporation and condensation cycle water continuously. Tides shift shorelines daily, but change coastlines over centuries. What feels stable is actually dynamic over long enough time, and this long view changes how stillness is understood. Stillness becomes temporary equilibrium rather than absence of movement. A forest in winter is still exchanging gases, moisture, and energy. A lake frozen on the surface is still active beneath. A field resting after harvest is still preparing soil structure for the next cycle. Nothing in nature truly stops. It only changes expression, and expression depends on conditions: temperature, light, moisture, time. These variables shape how life appears at any moment. And because these variables are always shifting, expression is always shifting too. This is why no two seasons ever feel exactly identical. Even if the calendar says they are the same season, the atmosphere is never fully repeated. Weather patterns differ, light intensity differs, human perception differs. Memory of previous seasons changes how the current one is experienced, so each year becomes a slightly different version of the same pattern. And over time, this creates a sense of depth in experience. You are not simply living through seasons. You are remembering previous ones while experiencing new ones. And this layering of memory and perception creates emotional texture. A warm spring day may feel different depending on what came before it. A cool autumn evening may feel different depending on what it follows. Nature and memory begin to overlap, and this overlap is subtle but constant. Even smells can trigger entire seasonal memories instantly. Rain on dry soil, cold air before snowfall, fresh leaves in early spring, dry grass in late summer. These sensory cues are deeply embedded in human perception, and they connect present experience to past cycles without effort. So in a way, seasons are not only external events, they are internal experiences as well. They exist in weather and in memory simultaneously. And this dual presence gives them emotional weight, not because they are dramatic, but because they are familiar and changing at the same time. And perhaps this is why observing nature often feels calming. It does not demand resolution. It does not insist on permanence. It simply continues, changing slowly enough to follow, and continuously enough to trust. And tonight, as the Earth keeps turning through space, that continuity remains uninterrupted. Seasons shift across continents. Light moves across hemispheres. Forests respond in silence. Oceans circulate heat across vast distances. And life continues its steady participation in a cycle that has been unfolding long before memory began, and will continue long after any single moment has passed. If you continue tracing the seasons far enough, you start to notice that they are not just changes in nature, they are changes in attention. In spring, attention moves outward. The world becomes more visible again after winter's reduction of light and sound. Details return slowly. Color in plants, movement in animals, texture in the air. The mind begins to notice more because there is more to notice. In summer, attention expands fully. Everything feels active at once. Sound, heat, light, and motion overlap. There is often a sense of fullness in perception, as if the environment is offering more information than usual. In autumn, attention begins to narrow again, not in loss, but in focus. The world becomes more structured, more defined. Light softens, colors deepen, movement slows, and perception begins to turn inward slightly. In winter, attention compresses. The external world reduces in intensity. Sounds are fewer, colors are muted, and awareness often becomes more internal than external. Thought becomes more noticeable than environment. But none of these states are absolute. They are tendencies, shifts in emphasis rather than complete transformations. And this is important because nature rarely operates in extremes. It operates in gradients. Even temperature changes gradually across most environments. Even storms build slowly before they arrive. Even silence increases or decreases rather than appearing instantly. The world is almost always in transition, and transitions are where most of life actually happens. A seed does not become a plant in one step. A river does not carve a canyon in one moment. A forest does not shift from one ecosystem to another overnight. Everything moves through intermediate states, and these intermediate states are often the most active, even if they are the least visible. Spring is full of these intermediate states: bud formation, soil warming, microbial activation, insect emergence, bird migration returning. Yet from a distance, it can still look quiet. Summer hides transitions differently. It appears stable on the surface, but beneath that stability, energy is constantly being exchanged. Growth continues, pollination continues, feeding cycles continue. Autumn is the season where transitions become visible. Color change, leaf fall, temperature shifts, behavioral changes in animals, and winter compresses transitions into slow, almost hidden processes: storage, rest, conservation, reorganization beneath stillness. And then the cycle begins again, but not identically, because each cycle is influenced by the one before it. This is one of the most subtle structures in nature: repetition with variation, continuity with difference. A forest that experiences 1 year of heavy rainfall will not behave exactly the same after it. A region affected by drought will not recover in the same pattern as before. Even slight shifts in temperature over years can alter migration timing, flowering periods, and ecosystem balance. So nature is never truly repeating itself. It is always adjusting, and adjustment is continuous. Even mountains are part of this process. Though they appear fixed, they are slowly shaped by wind, water, temperature, and time. Erosion removes material. Tectonic movement adds it. Vegetation changes surface stability. Rainfall alters flow patterns across slopes. Over thousands or millions of years, entire landscapes are reshaped. But within human perception, these changes are almost invisible. So stillness becomes a matter of scale, and scale changes everything. A moment can feel static. A year can feel dynamic. A century reveals transformation clearly, and a geological era reveals continuous motion. Nature contains all of these scales at once, and seasons are simply the most accessible expression of this larger structure. They compress long-term planetary motion into something humans can perceive directly: a yearly cycle of change that reflects much larger systems of astronomical movement. Earth orbiting the Sun, Earth tilting on its axis, light shifting across hemispheres, atmospheric patterns responding to energy distribution, all of it producing the experience of seasons. And within those seasons, life responds. Plants adjust growth cycles. Animals adjust behavior. Humans adjust routines and emotional rhythms. Even if not consciously aware of it, biological systems respond continuously because they are part of the same environment. There is no separation between organism and season, only interaction, and that interaction is ongoing, even at night. Night is not absence. It is a different arrangement of activity. Some species become more active, others rest. Temperature drops change movement patterns. Sound travels differently. Light becomes indirect and reflected rather than direct. The world does not stop. It reorganizes, and this reorganization happens daily as well as seasonally. Day becomes night. Night becomes day. Light increases. Light decreases. Activity expands. Activity contracts. And these daily cycles sit inside seasonal cycles like patterns within patterns, a rhythm inside a rhythm, a structure nested within a larger structure. And this nesting is what gives nature its depth. Nothing exists alone. Everything exists in relation. Even a single drop of rain is part of a larger system involving oceans, clouds, temperature, air currents, and solar energy. Even a single leaf is part of a tree, a forest, a climate system, and a global cycle of carbon exchange. Everything is connected through continuous movement, and yet, within that movement, there is stability, not in form, but in process. The process continues, regardless of variation. And this is perhaps the most consistent feature of seasonal life: continuity through change, and change through continuity. So when you observe a season slowly, without urgency, what you are really seeing is not just weather or landscape. You are seeing a system maintaining itself through transformation, a balance of motion and rest, expansion and contraction, growth and return. And tonight, across the planet, that balance continues without interruption. Somewhere, spring is beginning again. Somewhere, summer is reaching its peak. Somewhere, autumn is deepening into color. Somewhere, winter is holding everything in quiet suspension, and the earth keeps turning through all of it, carrying every living system through another layer of its endless, steady, and deeply patient cycle. If you keep following this pattern far enough, the idea of beginning and ending starts to lose some of its sharpness. In nature, beginnings are rarely clean, and endings are rarely final. A fallen leaf is not an ending in isolation. It is the beginning of decomposition, of soil formation, of nutrients returning to roots that will support future growth. A sprouting seed is not a beginning without history. It carries within it the entire structure of the plant it will become, already shaped by the season that allowed it to form. So even what looks like a starting point is always part of something older, and what looks like an ending is always part of something continuing. This is one of the quietest patterns in seasonal life. Nothing truly appears from nothing, and nothing truly disappears into nothing. Everything transitions, slowly, continuously, and often invisibly at first. A winter field may look empty, but beneath the surface, structure is being preserved. Soil organisms remain active at lower levels. Roots maintain stability. Seeds remain dormant but intact, protected by layers of earth and organic matter. The field is not inactive, it is just operating at a different depth. And depth is an important part of how nature organizes itself. What is visible is only the surface layer of a much larger system. Forests, for example, are not only what rises above ground, they are also what exists below it. Root networks extend outward and downward, forming relationships with fungi and microorganisms that span large areas of soil. These networks exchange nutrients, support growth, and stabilize ecosystems in ways that are still being studied. So when you see a forest, you are not seeing a collection of individual trees. You are seeing a shared system of life connected through visible and invisible pathways, and seasons influence these pathways constantly. In spring, nutrient flow increases. In summer, growth dominates. In autumn, redistribution begins. In winter, conservation becomes more important. The same system changes its emphasis without changing its structure, and this ability to shift emphasis is what allows ecosystems to remain stable over long periods of time. Flexibility is not weakness in nature, it is stability through adaptation. A rigid system breaks under change. A flexible system adjusts, and seasons are one of the clearest demonstrations of this principle. Temperature changes, light changes, moisture changes, and life responds accordingly. Not once, but continuously. Even the ocean participates in this seasonal responsiveness. Surface temperatures shift with sunlight. Currents adjust heat distribution across the planet. Marine life changes behavior according to temperature and food availability. Plankton blooms appear in response to light and nutrient conditions, forming the base of entire marine food chains. And these changes ripple upward through all levels of ocean life. Fish, mammals, birds, and even weather systems are influenced indirectly by these microscopic cycles. Something so small can shape something so large, and that pattern repeats throughout nature. Small changes accumulate into large effects over time. A slight increase in spring temperature can shift flowering schedules. A small change in rainfall can alter migration timing. A minor variation in wind patterns can affect seed dispersal across entire regions. Nature is extremely sensitive to gradual change, and because of that sensitivity, Seasons are never identical. Even if they appear similar from year to year, underlying conditions are always shifting. This is why memory of seasons often feels layered rather than precise. You remember a summer, but not every detail of it. You remember a winter, but not every day within it. What remains is a sense of atmosphere, a feeling, a pattern rather than a sequence, because seasons are experienced as environments, not as isolated moments, and environments influence perception continuously. Light changes how space feels, temperature changes how time feels, sound changes how distance feels. Even smell can change emotional tone almost instantly. So seasonal memory is not just visual, it is multisensory, and this multisensory nature is part of what makes it so deeply embedded in human experience. A cold morning air can instantly bring awareness of winter. The smell of wet soil can bring awareness of spring. Dry heat can bring awareness of summer. Falling leaves can bring awareness of autumn. These cues operate beneath conscious thought, and they connect present experience to past cycles automatically. So in a sense, humans do not just remember seasons, they re-enter them through sensory association. And this re-entry is never exactly the same, because the present moment is always different from the past, even if the pattern feels familiar. And this is where nature's quiet complexity becomes most visible. Familiarity without repetition, structure without rigidity, change without chaos. Even storms reflect this balance. A storm is not purely destruction. It is also redistribution. Heat is moved, water is moved, pressure is equalized, nutrients are returned to soil, seeds are dispersed, landscapes are reshaped in ways that create future conditions for growth. What appears intense in the moment becomes part of longer stability, and this dual nature exists throughout seasonal systems. Autumn leaves falling may look like loss, but it is also preparation. Winter quiet may look like absence, but it is also preservation. Spring emergence may look sudden, but it is the result of long internal build-up. Summer abundance may look permanent, but it is part of a cycle that will eventually shift again. Nothing is isolated in meaning. Everything is part of a sequence that extends beyond itself. And perhaps this is one of the most calming aspects of observing nature closely. It reduces the feeling of finality. It replaces finality with continuity. Even night follows this pattern. Night is not an ending of the day. It is a phase of redistribution. Temperature shifts, light cycles pause, certain species become active, others rest. The world continues functioning, just differently. And dawn is not a replacement of night. It is a continuation of planetary rotation, bringing light back into a different region of the surface. So even day and night are not opposites. They are two expressions of the same movement. And that movement is constant. Earth rotates, Earth orbits, light shifts, atmosphere responds, life adapts, and seasons emerge from that larger motion. Spring, summer, autumn, winter, not as isolated events, but as phases of a continuous planetary rhythm. And within that rhythm, everything participates: forests, rivers, oceans, mountains, animals, weather systems, and human beings, all moving together through cycles that are larger than any single moment. And tonight, as that movement continues without pause, the world remains quietly active across every scale at once. Beneath soil, across oceans, through forests, and above mountains, carrying every living process forward into whatever seasonal state comes next. If you continue to observe the seasonal cycle long enough, something subtle begins to shift in how time feels internally. It becomes less like something you move through, and more like something you move with. Because in nature, nothing is ever outside the cycle. Everything is already inside it. Even what feels like interruption is just another phase of adjustment. A sudden storm is still part of atmospheric balance. A dry spell is still part of water redistribution. A cold snap is still part of seasonal transition, not a break from it. So the system never truly leaves itself. It only changes configuration. And this idea becomes especially clear when you look at long-term ecological change. Forests do not remain static over decades. Species composition shifts gradually. Some trees thrive under changing conditions while others decline. New plants appear in openings created by fallen trees. Animals adjust territory ranges and feeding patterns, but the forest remains recognizable throughout. It It maintains identity through transformation, not through sameness. And this is a key pattern across nature. Identity is not fixed structure, it is continuous process. A river is a river because it flows, not because it holds the same water. A season is a season because it moves through a certain pattern of change, not because it repeats identical conditions. And life itself follows this principle at every scale. Cells in the body are constantly replaced. Atoms are exchanged through breathing, eating, and environmental interaction. Even thoughts are not permanent structures, but ongoing processes that arise, shift, and dissolve. So what appears stable is actually a flow that maintains coherence over time. And seasons are one of the clearest external expressions of this internal principle. They show that continuity does not require stillness, it requires rhythm, and rhythm is built from repetition with variation. Spring returns each year, but never in the same form. Summer arrives again, but never with identical conditions. Autumn unfolds repeatedly, but always with different timing, color, and atmosphere. Winter settles in, but each winter carries its own combination of temperature, light, and ecological response. So the cycle is consistent, but never static. And this is why it feels both familiar and new at the same time. There is comfort in recognition and subtle attention in difference. Even human perception participates in this seasonal variability. Attention itself changes with environment. In brighter seasons, perception expands outward. In darker seasons, it often turns inward. In warmer conditions, awareness tends to distribute across external activity. In colder conditions, awareness often becomes more concentrated and reflective. So the mind is not separate from seasonal structure. It is embedded within it. And because of that, seasons influence experience even when they are not consciously noticed. A person may not think about daylight length, but still feel its effects. A person may not track atmospheric humidity, but still respond to it physically. A person may not observe subtle temperature shifts, but still adjust behavior accordingly. So seasonal awareness is partly unconscious, a background rhythm shaping experience continuously, and nature never stops maintaining that rhythm, even at night. Night is one of the most structurally important parts of the cycle. It allows systems to reset, temperatures stabilize, certain biological processes activate, others slow down. Light-sensitive organisms adapt behavior accordingly, and the absence of direct sunlight creates space for different kinds of activity. Nocturnal systems emerge, cooling processes dominate, moisture patterns shift, and above it all, the planet continues rotating with precision that has remained stable for billions of years. One full rotation every day, one orbit around the sun each year, tilted axis maintaining seasonal variation across hemispheres. These large-scale movements are the foundation of everything seasonal. Without them, there would be no cycles of growth and rest, no structured variation in climate, no predictable shifts in light. And yet these movements are so consistent that they become invisible in daily awareness. They are background structure, and nature builds everything else on top of that structure. Weather systems respond to it, oceans respond to it, atmospheres respond to it, life responds to it, and over time, ecosystems evolve in alignment with it. Plants adapt growth cycles to daylight. Animals adapt behavior to temperature and resource availability. Entire ecosystems synchronize with planetary rhythm. And this synchronization creates stability without rigidity, because nothing in nature is required to remain unchanged in order to function. Adaptation is built into every layer, and adaptation is what allows continuity through change. Even landscapes that appear unchanging are constantly adapting at slower scales. Mountains erode gradually under wind and water. Soil layers shift with seasonal deposition and decomposition. River paths adjust with flood cycles and sediment movement. Coastlines reshape through wave activity and tidal patterns. Everything is slowly in motion, but the motion is often too gradual to perceive directly. So stillness becomes a matter of perspective, and perspective depends on timescale. At human timescale, a tree appears still. At ecological timescale, it is active. At geological timescale, even mountains are in motion. So nothing is truly static, only differently paced. And this difference in pace is one of the most important characteristics of natural systems because it allows multiple forms of life to coexist, fast cycles and slow cycles operating together, daily rhythms and seasonal rhythms interacting continuously, short-term responses embedded within long-term structures, and all of it synchronized through shared environmental conditions: light, temperature, water, energy. These are the common threads connecting everything, and seasons are simply the most visible expression of how these threads shift over time. So when you observe a seasonal landscape carefully, you are not just seeing weather changes, you are seeing a layered system adjusting itself, a living network responding to external conditions through internal coordination. And this coordination is never forced. It emerges naturally from interaction, and because it emerges, it remains flexible, able to absorb variation, able to continue through disruption, able to recover after disturbance. And this resilience is not based on resistance, it is based on responsiveness. And responsiveness is what defines living systems more than anything else. A forest responds, a river responds, an ocean responds, a climate responds, life itself responds. And this constant responsiveness is what creates continuity across seasons. Even when conditions shift dramatically, systems adjust rather than collapse. And tonight, that adjustment continues everywhere at once, in quiet soil beneath resting fields, in forests slowly exchanging gases through leaves and roots, in oceans redistributing heat across continents, in skies where wind patterns shift invisible currents of moisture and temperature, and in every living system participating in the ongoing rhythm of a planet that never stops moving through its long, patient cycle of change. If you continue following the seasonal cycle far enough, you begin to notice something even quieter than change itself. You begin to notice restoration. Not sudden restoration, not dramatic recovery, but slow, almost invisible repair happening continuously inside the system. Nature does not wait for damage to be fully complete before beginning to recover. It starts immediately, even while change is still happening, even while disruption is ongoing. A forest that experiences heavy rain does not pause afterward to decide what to do next. Soil begins adjusting moisture balance right away. Microorganisms respond within hours. Plant roots adapt to new conditions as they stabilize. Drainage patterns slowly reorganize themselves. Restoration is not a separate phase in nature. It is embedded inside every phase, and this is especially visible across seasons. In spring, restoration appears as reactivation. Systems that were slowed during winter begin functioning again. Growth resumes. Energy circulation increases. Biological processes accelerate. But this is not simply returning to normal. It is rebuilding based on current conditions, not past ones. Summer continues that restoration through expansion. Ecosystems stabilize into full activity. Resources circulate at higher levels. Populations of plants, insects, and animals adjust to peak availability. But even at this peak, balance is being maintained continuously. Autumn introduces redistribution. Energy is not lost, it is moved. Leaves return nutrients to soil. Animals shift location or behavior. Plants redirect internal resources downward. What looks like decline is actually transfer. And winter is often misunderstood as inactivity, when in reality it is conservation. Energy is stored, structures are preserved, systems are stabilized in low activity mode. Repair continues beneath the surface, and when spring returns, it is not starting from zero. It is continuing from what was preserved. So each season is not isolated. It is part of a continuous maintenance system, a system that never fully stops working. And this continuous maintenance is one of the most fundamental characteristics of natural environments. Even when external conditions seem extreme, internal balance is being constantly negotiated. Temperature fluctuations are buffered by soil. Water cycles adjust through evaporation and condensation. Atmospheric systems redistribute pressure differences across large regions. Life responds to every shift through adaptation rather than resistance. And adaptation itself is a form of restoration because it maintains continuity despite change. Even in environments that appear harsh, such as deserts or tundras, restoration is ongoing. In deserts, organisms adapt to extreme dryness through specialized water storage and minimal energy use. In tundras, life cycles are compressed into short seasonal windows, but remain highly efficient during those periods. In both cases, life does not stop. It adjusts its timing, and timing is one of the most important elements of seasonal existence. Everything in nature is scheduled by conditions rather than fixed calendars. Temperature signals growth. Light signals reproduction. Moisture signals activity. These environmental cues determine when systems shift states, and because these cues vary slightly each year, timing is never identical. So even the same species behaves slightly differently each season. This creates variation inside repetition, and variation is what allows resilience. If every system behaved identically, it would be vulnerable to identical disruption. But variation spreads risk. It distributes outcomes across time and space, and this distribution strengthens ecosystems over long periods. Even forests rely on this principle. Different trees respond differently to the same conditions. Some grow faster, some grow slower, some resist drought better, some recover more effectively after disturbance. This diversity ensures that no single environmental event can collapse the entire system, and this pattern is repeated across all scales of nature. Diversity is not random, it is functional, and seasonal cycles support that diversity by continuously reshaping conditions. Light changes across the year, temperature changes across the year, moisture availability changes across the year. These changes prevent ecosystems from becoming static. They encourage adaptation, and adaptation creates complexity. Even soundscapes reflect this seasonal complexity. Spring soundscapes are layered with emergence. Bird calls increase. Insects begin activity cycles. Water movement from melting snow adds continuous background flow. Summer soundscapes reach fullness. Activity is widespread and overlapping. Autumn soundscapes become more structured. Leaves alter sound absorption. Wind passes differently through thinning canopies. Winter soundscapes become sparse but clearer. Distances feel longer. Individual sounds become more distinct. So even the acoustic environment is shaped by seasonal structure, and humans often respond to these shifts without consciously recognizing them. There is also a subtle psychological effect in seasonal transitions. Because change is gradual, perception adjusts slowly as well. This creates a sense of continuity even during transformation. You do not experience a sudden shift in reality. You experience incremental differences that accumulate into new conditions, and this incremental nature reduces the sense of disruption. Even when conditions are changing significantly, the body adapts step by step, and this adaptation is not limited to external comfort. It extends into internal rhythm as well. Sleep cycles adjust to daylight length, energy levels adjust to temperature, attention patterns adjust to environmental stimulation. So human experience is deeply synchronized with seasonal rhythm, whether consciously observed or not. And this synchronization has existed for as long as humans have lived within natural environments. Before artificial lighting, seasonal light variation directly shaped daily life. Before controlled climate environments, temperature changes shaped behavior. Before modern infrastructure, food availability followed seasonal cycles closely. So human biology and seasonal structure evolved together over long periods of time, and traces of that relationship still remain. Even now, even in artificial environments, the body still responds to light, still responds to temperature, still responds to atmospheric change, because those responses are deeply embedded and they do not disappear easily. They continue as background processes, just like seasons themselves continue as background processes of the planet. And when you step back far enough, everything appears connected through rhythm. Daily rhythm, seasonal rhythm, oceanic rhythm, atmospheric rhythm, geological rhythm, cosmic rhythm. Each one nested within the other, each one influencing the next, and none of them isolated. So when you observe a single season, you are actually observing a small expression of a much larger system in motion, a system that extends beyond immediate perception and continues whether or not it is being watched. And tonight, that system continues in its quiet, steady way, across forests resting in low light, across oceans redistributing warmth through deep currents, across skies where wind carries temperature and moisture across continents, across soil where life continues its slow processes of exchange and renewal, and across every living system participating without pause in the ongoing rhythm of a planet that is always changing yet always continuing at the same time. If you follow the seasonal cycle even further, you start to notice something that is not immediately about nature at all, but about how systems sustain themselves over time. They do not rely on perfection. They rely on balance between loss and renewal. Every season contains both, even when one seems dominant. Spring is renewal, but it still carries remnants of winter in cold mornings and delayed growth. Summer is abundance, but it still contains limits in droughts, heat shifts, and periods of rest within growth cycles. Autumn is decline in appearance, but it is also redistribution at a deeper level. Winter is reduction in activity, but it is also storage, preservation, and preparation. Nothing is ever purely one thing. Everything is a combination of states adjusting in proportion, and that proportional adjustment is what allows nature to remain stable over long periods of time. Stability, in this sense, is not resistance to change. It is the ability to absorb change without losing structure. A forest does not avoid storms. It incorporates them. A river does not avoid obstacles. It flows around and through them. An ecosystem does not avoid variation. It uses variation to strengthen itself. And this principle becomes especially clear when observing long seasonal cycles across multiple years. A single season can feel unusual. A cold spring, a wet summer, a dry autumn, a mild winter. But when observed over decades, these variations become part of a larger pattern of fluctuation rather than disruption. The system does not break, it adjusts its range, and this adjustment is continuous. Even subtle shifts in temperature averages over years gradually reshape entire ecosystems. Species distribution changes, migration routes shift, flowering times adjust, snowfall patterns alter water availability in distant seasons. What happens in one part of the cycle eventually influences another part, far ahead in time. So seasons are not isolated loops. They are interconnected sequences, and this interconnectedness is one of the reasons natural systems feel so coherent when observed slowly. Everything is linked. Even processes that seem unrelated at first are part of the same underlying structure. Evaporation becomes clouds, clouds become rain, rain becomes rivers, rivers become oceans, oceans become evaporation again, and this cycle continues without interruption. Not perfectly, not uniformly, but continuously. And within that continuity, life builds its own cycles. Plants adjust to rainfall timing, animals adjust to temperature patterns, microorganisms respond to moisture and decay rates. Human life also follows these rhythms in subtle ways. Even when modern environments reduce direct exposure, there are still internal responses to daylight length. There are still shifts in energy levels across seasons. There are still emotional and cognitive changes influenced by environmental variation. These responses are not always obvious, but they remain part of biological structure because biological systems developed within seasonal environments. So even in artificial settings, the underlying rhythm remains present. It is simply less visible, and visibility is important in how we interpret change. When change is visible, it feels immediate. When change is gradual, it feels less noticeable, but both are equally real. A forest growing by a few millimeters each year is still changing significantly over time. A coastline shifting slowly through erosion is still transforming geography. A climate pattern adjusting slightly over decades is still altering ecosystems profoundly. Scale determines perception, not importance, and seasonal thinking naturally expands that scale. It reminds you that time is not always experienced in short segments. Some processes require longer observation to be understood. Even human memory reflects this layering of time. You do not remember every moment of a season. You remember impressions, patterns, atmospheres, a feeling of how a spring felt, a sense of how a summer unfolded, a memory of how an autumn light changed over weeks. And these memories are not precise records. They are summaries of experience across time. So even memory operates seasonally in a way. It compresses continuous experience into recognizable patterns, and this compression helps make sense of change without overwhelming detail. Nature itself also uses compression in its cycles. Winter compresses activity into minimal expression. Summer expands it into maximum expression. Spring and autumn act as transitional compressions and expansions between those states, so the entire cycle can be seen as a rhythm of expansion and contraction, like breathing. Inhalation, exhalation, pause, transition, and then repetition, but never identical repetition, because each cycle carries forward the conditions created by the previous one. So even repetition is progression, and progression is always slightly different from what came before. This is why seasons never feel completely predictable in detail, even though they are predictable in structure. You know that spring will arrive, but you do not know exactly how it will feel each year. You know that winter will return, but you do not know its precise intensity. You know that summer will expand warmth, but not its exact distribution. So certainty exists in pattern, but not in detail. And that balance between certainty and variation is what gives natural systems their sense of depth. Too much certainty would create rigidity. Too much variation would create instability. But nature exists in a middle range where structure allows flexibility, and flexibility maintains structure. This relationship is visible in every seasonal transition. Even soil reflects it. Soil is not static material. It is constantly being formed and reformed through biological activity, weathering, and organic decomposition. In spring, it becomes more active as temperatures rise. In summer, it stabilizes under consistent warmth. In autumn, it begins accumulating organic material. In winter, it conserves structure, while slower processes continue beneath the surface. So soil itself participates in seasonal rhythm, and soil is one of the most fundamental systems supporting all life on land. Everything growing above it depends on what is happening within it. So even the most visible seasonal changes are supported by invisible layers of activity below, and this pattern repeats across ecosystems. Above-ground change is supported by below-ground continuity. Visible transformation is supported by invisible stability, and this dual structure is present everywhere in nature, even in weather systems. Storms form in layers of atmospheric movement that are not immediately visible from the ground. Cloud formations depend on temperature gradients and moisture levels across large regions of air. Wind patterns are shaped by pressure differences across continents and oceans. What is experienced as weather is only the surface expression of deeper atmospheric processes, and these processes are constantly in motion. So even calm weather is part of larger circulation. Even still skies are part of continuous movement. And when you extend this understanding outward, the entire planet becomes a system of layered cycles interacting at different speeds. Fast cycles like weather, medium cycles like seasons, slow cycles like ocean currents and climate shifts, very slow cycles like geological transformation, and all of them operating simultaneously. None of them separate, all of them connected. And this connection is what gives nature its coherence. Even across immense complexity, the system remains unified through interaction. And tonight, that interaction continues without pause, through shifting air above forests, through temperature exchange across oceans, through soil quietly maintaining structure beneath resting fields, through light and darkness alternating across hemispheres, and through every living system participating, in its own way, in the ongoing seasonal rhythm of a planet that never stops moving, never stops adjusting, and never stops becoming what it is next. If you stay with the seasons long enough, you begin to notice that they are not just cycles of nature, but cycles of balance. Every shift in one direction is met with an adjustment in another. Warmth increases, then gradually decreases. Light expands, then slowly retreats. Growth accelerates, then naturally slows. Nothing moves without an accompanying counter-movement somewhere else in the system. This is not opposition, it is equilibrium. And equilibrium in nature is not stillness, it is controlled movement. A forest in spring is not simply growing upward, it is also sending energy downward into roots. A river in flood is not just expanding outward, it is also carving deeper channels that will guide future flow. A summer ecosystem is not only producing abundance, it is also distributing and consuming that abundance across many layers of life simultaneously. Even what appears to be excess is being regulated constantly. And in autumn, the same principle appears in reverse. What is released is not lost. It is redistributed. What falls returns to soil. What slows down prepares for conservation. What appears to decline is reorganizing itself for another cycle of continuation. And winter, often misunderstood as absence, is actually a phase of stabilization. Energy is not gone. It is held in quieter forms. Systems are not inactive. They are operating at reduced external expression while maintaining internal structure. And this balance between visible activity and invisible maintenance is one of the most consistent patterns in nature. What you see is never the full system. It is only the part currently expressed, and expression changes with conditions. Temperature determines expression. Light determines expression. Moisture determines expression. Season determines expression. But the underlying system remains continuous. This is why seasonal change feels like transformation without interruption. Nothing is replaced. Everything is adjusted. Even in extreme seasonal environments, where changes are more dramatic, the underlying continuity remains. In regions with heavy winter snowfall, life does not stop. It adapts beneath insulation. In regions with intense dry seasons, life does not disappear. It reduces visible activity and shifts survival strategies. In tropical regions with less variation in temperature but stronger variation in rainfall, life responds to moisture cycles rather than temperature cycles. So seasons are not uniform across the planet, but the principle of response remains consistent. Life responds to environmental rhythm, and environmental rhythm is shaped by planetary movement. Earth's tilt creates variation in sunlight. Earth's orbit distributes that variation over time. Atmospheric systems distribute heat and moisture across regions. Ocean currents redistribute energy across continents, and all of these systems interact continuously. So even something as simple as seasonal change is actually the result of multiple overlapping planetary systems working together. And within that structure, ecosystems evolve. Plants develop timing strategies. Animals develop migration patterns. Microorganisms develop dormancy cycles. Each form of life finds a way to align itself with environmental rhythm, not by controlling it, but by responding to it. And response is the key mechanism of survival in nature. Rigid systems fail when conditions change. Responsive systems continue, and responsiveness requires sensitivity. Sensitivity to light, sensitivity to temperature, sensitivity to moisture, sensitivity to timing. This sensitivity is built into biological systems at every level. Even cells respond to environmental change through chemical signaling. Even molecular processes adjust based on external conditions. So adaptation is not a high-level feature. It is foundational. And because of this foundation, life is always in a state of subtle adjustment, even when it appears stable. And seasonal cycles make this adjustment visible at larger scales. You can see trees changing structure over months. You can see animals shifting behavior across seasons. You can see landscapes transforming over time. But beneath those visible changes, smaller adjustments are always happening continuously, and these small adjustments accumulate into large transformations. A single cold night does not define winter, but many cold nights together create a seasonal pattern. A single warm day does not define spring, but repeated warming trends shift entire ecosystems. So seasons are not defined by isolated events. They are defined by accumulation, and accumulation is often invisible until it reaches a threshold. This threshold effect is one of the most important dynamics in nature. Small changes build quietly until they become noticeable transformation. And then, suddenly, the system appears different. But the change was never sudden, only its visibility was. This is why seasonal transitions often feel gradual at first, then more noticeable later. The system is crossing thresholds slowly, and perception only registers the change once it becomes large enough to notice. But nature itself does not wait for perception. It continues adjusting continuously, even during moments that feel static. A clear sky is still part of atmospheric circulation. A calm forest is still exchanging gases and moisture. A quiet field is still undergoing soil and microbial processes. Nothing is truly inactive, only differently active. And this idea becomes clearer when observing long periods of seasonal continuity over multiple years. Patterns emerge that are not visible within a single season. Climate variability becomes apparent. Ecosystem shifts become noticeable. Long-term trends appear across repeated cycles, and these longer patterns reveal that seasons themselves are part of even larger rhythms. Decadal cycles, oceanic cycles, solar cycles, geological cycles, each one influencing the others in complex ways. So what feels like a simple yearly pattern is actually embedded in a much larger system of layered timescales. And humans exist within all of these layers simultaneously, experiencing daily cycles of light and rest, seasonal cycles of growth and rest, long-term cycles of environmental change, all overlapping in continuous interaction. And because these cycles overlap, perception of time is never purely linear. It is layered. A single moment contains echoes of past seasons and expectations of future ones. A cold wind may remind the body of previous winters. A warm breeze may suggest upcoming changes even before they fully arrive. Memory and anticipation become part of present experience, and nature itself encourages this layered awareness. Because nothing in nature exists only in the present moment. Everything carries history and potential simultaneously. A tree carries years of growth in its structure. A river carries upstream and downstream connections in every moment of flow. A cloud carries evaporation from distant oceans and condensation from local air currents. Everything is connected across time and space, and seasons are one of the most visible ways that this connection becomes perceptible. They compress large planetary systems into human-scale experience, so that slow astronomical and ecological processes become observable as familiar cycles of change. And this familiarity creates a sense of continuity, even when conditions vary, even when weather is unpredictable, even when individual days feel different. The underlying structure remains stable enough to recognize, and that recognition is what gives seasonal experience its quiet, grounding quality. Not because everything stays the same, but because everything stays connected, and tonight, across the planet, that connection continues without interruption. In soil holding moisture after seasonal rain, in forests slowly shifting light patterns across changing canopy layers, in oceans circulating heat beneath vast surfaces, in air currents carrying temperature across continents, and in every living system participating, quietly and continuously, in the ongoing rhythm of a planet that is always in motion, always in balance, and always moving through the next phase of its endless seasonal unfolding. If you continue following the seasonal cycle even further, you begin to notice something that is less about change itself and more about the way change organizes reality. Nothing in nature changes randomly. Even when it appears chaotic, there is structure underneath. A storm does not form without pressure systems aligning over distance. A drought does not appear without long-term atmospheric patterns shifting moisture distribution. A cold wave does not arrive without larger polar and jet stream movements guiding air masses across continents. So what feels like unpredictability at the surface is often guided by deeper patterns that unfold slowly and invisibly. And seasons are the most familiar expression of that deeper order. They are not interruptions of stability. They are the visible rhythm of stability in motion. Spring does not break winter. It emerges from it. Summer does not replace spring. It extends it. Autumn does not end summer abruptly. It transforms it gradually. And winter is not a disappearance of life. It is a different configuration of life's activity. So each season is less a separate event and more a phase within a continuous system, a system that never stops adjusting itself. And that adjustment is not limited to weather. It extends into all levels of ecological structure. Soil composition changes across seasons. Microbial activity increases and decreases with temperature and moisture. Plant metabolism adjusts based on light availability. Animal behavior shifts according to resource distribution. Even the chemistry of water bodies changes slightly with seasonal temperature variation. Everything responds, everything participates, and nothing remains entirely fixed. Even landscapes that appear stable are undergoing slow transformation. A hillside may seem unchanged year to year, but its soil is slowly shifting under rainfall and vegetation growth. A forest may appear consistent, but species composition is gradually evolving in response to long-term climate patterns. A river may look constant, but its course is always adjusting at microscopic levels through sediment movement. So stability in nature is not absence of change. It is controlled change that maintains structure over time. And this controlled change is what allows life to persist through variation. Because environments are never fully stable. They fluctuate continuously, day to night, warm to cold, wet to dry, high pressure to low pressure. But systems that can adjust to fluctuation do not collapse. They continue, and seasonal cycles are one of the clearest examples of this principle in action. Each year introduces variation. No 2 years are identical, yet the overall structure of seasons remains recognizable. This is because the system is governed by large-scale planetary mechanics that remain consistent. Earth's orbit, Earth's axial tilt, solar energy distribution, atmospheric circulation, oceanic heat transfer. These forces remain stable enough to produce predictable patterns. But within those patterns, there is always variability. And that variability is where complexity emerges. For example, spring may arrive earlier in one region due to warmer atmospheric conditions, or later due to lingering cold air masses. Summer may be wetter in one year and drier in another. Autumn may shift color patterns faster or slower depending on temperature variation. Winter may be mild or severe depending on atmospheric oscillations. So the seasonal cycle is not a rigid loop. It is a flexible rhythm, and flexibility is what allows it to remain stable over long periods of time. Even ecosystems depend on this flexibility. A rigid ecosystem would fail under changing conditions. A flexible ecosystem adapts, and adaptation often happens through diversity. Different species respond differently to the same seasonal signals. Some plants thrive in early spring conditions. Others emerge later in warmer phases. Some animals migrate. Others hibernate. Some remain active year-round but adjust behavior intensity. This diversity of response spreads ecological risk, so no single seasonal variation can disrupt the entire system. And this principle repeats across all levels of nature. Diversity is not incidental. It is functional. It is a stabilizing mechanism embedded within living systems, even within a single forest. Variation exists at every level. Different tree species respond differently to sunlight. Different soil layers respond differently to moisture. Different microorganisms respond differently to temperature. And these differences create balance. Because no single condition dominates entirely. Everything is moderated by interaction. And interaction is constant, even when it is not visible. Wind interacts with terrain. Water interacts with soil. Light interacts with leaves. Temperature interacts with biological processes, and these interactions define how seasons are experienced locally, because global patterns are always filtered through local conditions. Latitude, altitude, proximity to water, vegetation density, and atmospheric circulation all influence how a season feels in a specific place. So there is no single version of spring or summer or autumn or winter. There are countless variations of each, and each variation is shaped by local environment interacting with global rhythm. This creates an immense diversity of seasonal experience across the planet. At one moment, snow may be falling in one region while warm rain falls in another, while elsewhere, dry heat dominates or cool breezes move through forests. All of these conditions exist simultaneously within the same planetary cycle. So the Earth is never in one season at a time. It is always in all seasons at once, distributed across different regions. And this distribution is continuous because the planet is continuously rotating. Light is continuously shifting. Atmospheric systems are continuously moving, and life is continuously responding. Even at night, when parts of the world are in darkness, others are in daylight. So activity never truly stops globally. It only shifts location. And this global continuity is one of the most stable aspects of natural systems. There is always movement somewhere, always transition occurring somewhere, always growth, decay, rest, or renewal happening across different regions, and this constant distribution of activity creates balance at planetary scale. Energy is never static. It circulates through air, water, soil, and living organisms, and seasons are one of the most visible expressions of that circulation. They reveal how energy shifts across time and space in structured patterns, not randomly, not abruptly, but rhythmically. And rhythmically, systems are easier to sustain over long durations. Because rhythm allows anticipation, and anticipation allows adaptation. Plants anticipate light changes, animals anticipate temperature changes, ecosystems anticipate moisture cycles, and even human behavior unconsciously adapts to these patterns. Sleep cycles shift, activity levels shift, mood and perception shift subtly with environmental conditions. So seasonal rhythm is not just external, it is internal as well. And this internal-external alignment is part of what makes seasonal awareness feel so natural. It is not imposed, it is already embedded, and when you observe it closely, you begin to see that seasons are not simply environmental changes. They are expressions of a much larger system of continuous adjustment, a system that includes atmosphere, hydrosphere, biosphere, and geosphere all interacting simultaneously. And this interaction never stops. It only changes form. And tonight, as that interaction continues, the planet remains in motion across every layer of existence. Air currents shift across continents. Ocean systems circulate heat across hemispheres. Soil continues slow biological processes beneath resting fields. Forests adjust internal cycles of energy and growth. And life, in all its forms, continues participating in the quiet, structured, and endlessly unfolding rhythm of seasonal change. If you continue observing the seasonal cycle even deeper, you start to notice something that is less about change and more about continuity underneath change. A kind of quiet persistence that never stops, even when everything else appears to slow down. In winter, for example, many processes move out of sight, but nothing actually stops. Roots still hold moisture in soil. Underground systems continue exchanging nutrients at reduced speed. Microorganisms remain active in low-temperature environments, adjusting their metabolism rather than shutting down. Even frozen landscapes are not truly still. They are stabilized states of motion, held in a different form. And this is true across all seasons, not just winter. In spring, continuity becomes more visible. Growth appears sudden, but it is the result of months of unseen preparation. In summer, continuity reaches full expression. Systems operate at peak interaction. In autumn, continuity redistributes itself. Energy is transferred rather than lost. So the entire cycle is not a sequence of separate conditions. It is a continuous system changing its mode of expression. And this idea becomes clearer when you look at long-term natural processes rather than short seasonal snapshots. A single year can feel like a cycle, but multiple years reveal patterns within the cycle. Wet years followed by dry years, warm trends followed by cooler periods, shifts in flowering times, migration patterns, and ecological balance. These are not random fluctuations. They are expressions of larger environmental rhythms layered over seasonal cycles. And those larger rhythms include ocean patterns that can last years or decades, atmospheric oscillations that influence weather across continents, solar variations that subtly affect energy input over time. So what appears to be a simple yearly pattern is actually nested inside multiple timescales operating simultaneously. And this nesting creates depth. A spring is not just spring. It is a spring influenced by long-term climate conditions, recent seasonal memory, and immediate atmospheric behavior. A winter is not just winter. It is winter shaped by ocean currents, previous seasonal accumulation, and planetary positioning in space. So each season is a convergence point, a moment where multiple systems meet and express themselves together. And within that convergence, life responds continuously. Plants adjust growth rates based on both immediate temperature and accumulated seasonal signals. Animals adjust behavior based on both current food availability and long-term environmental expectation. Even human perception is influenced by both immediate weather and deeper seasonal memory. So experience is always layered, never singular, and this layering is part of what gives natural environments their richness. Nothing is experienced in isolation. Everything is experienced in context. Even a single moment of rain is not just rainfall. It is rainfall occurring after a specific sequence of atmospheric conditions, seasonal timing, and environmental memory. It carries history and it influences future conditions because rainfall affects soil moisture. Soil moisture affects plant growth. Plant growth affects atmospheric exchange, and atmospheric exchange affects future rainfall patterns. So the system is continuously feeding back into itself. And this feedback loop is one of the core structures of seasonal life. Nothing operates independently. Everything influences everything else, directly or indirectly. Even slow geological processes are part of this feedback system. Mountains influence weather patterns by redirecting air currents. Oceans influence seasonal temperatures through heat storage and release. Forests influence atmospheric moisture through transpiration. Ice fields influence global reflectivity, affecting how much solar energy is absorbed or reflected. So Earth is not just a collection of environments. It is an integrated system of interacting cycles, and seasons are one of the most accessible ways humans perceive that integration, because they compress large-scale planetary interactions into familiar yearly patterns. Spring feels like renewal, but it is also a reflection of solar geometry, atmospheric redistribution, and ecological response. Summer feels like expansion, but it is also a phase of maximum energy absorption and biological activity. Autumn feels like transition, but it is also a phase of redistribution and preparation. Winter feels like reduction, but it is also a phase of conservation and stabilization. So emotional interpretations of seasons are linked to structural processes occurring at planetary scale. And this connection between perception and system is part of what makes seasonal awareness feel deeply intuitive. It aligns external observation with internal rhythm, and that alignment reduces friction between environment and perception, because the body is already adapted to these cycles, even without conscious awareness. Temperature regulation adjusts automatically. Light sensitivity adjusts gradually. Energy levels shift subtly. Sleep patterns respond to daylight length, so biological systems are continuously synchronized with environmental cycles. And this synchronization is ancient. It predates modern environments. It evolved in direct response to seasonal variation over long periods of time. So even in artificial conditions, traces of that synchronization remain, not as strong as before, but still present, still active, still influencing perception and behavior in subtle ways. And this is why seasonal changes often feel meaningful even when they are not dramatic, because they are not just external changes. They are changes in alignment between environment and internal system. And alignment is something the nervous system recognizes, even when the mind does not consciously analyze it. A shift in light can subtly change attention. A shift in temperature can subtly change mood. A shift in soundscape can subtly change perception of space. So seasonal transitions are also perceptual transitions, and perception is part of reality as experienced. So in that sense, seasons are partly internal phenomena as well as external ones. They exist in both environment and awareness simultaneously, and this dual presence creates depth in experience, because it connects what is outside with what is inside, not as separate domains, but as interacting systems. And this interaction continues continuously, even now, as air moves across continents carrying temperature and moisture, as oceans circulate energy across hemispheres, as soil slowly processes organic material beneath surface layers, as forests adjust internal cycles of growth and rest, as animals respond to environmental cues in timing and behavior, as human perception shifts subtly with light, temperature, and seasonal memory, all of it happening at once, all of it interconnected, and all of it part of a single ongoing system of planetary rhythm that continues without pause, without interruption, and without final completion. If you continue moving deeper into the seasonal cycle, there comes a point where it stops feeling like a sequence of changes and starts feeling more like a single continuous breathing system. Not separate seasons, but one long, slow respiration of the planet. Expansion, contraction, expansion again. And what we call spring, summer, autumn, and winter are simply names for different phases of that breath. In this sense, nothing in nature is ever truly between seasons. Everything is always inside a season that is already shifting. Even the quietest moments carry movement underneath them. A still forest in late winter is not outside the cycle. It is inside a low point of visible activity, where energy is conserved rather than expressed outwardly. And that conservation is not emptiness, it is preparation distributed across many layers. Soil holding nutrients, seeds holding structure, trees holding dormant potential in buds that will not open until conditions align. Even the air holds a kind of memory of what it has carried through previous months. Heat, moisture, pressure patterns, all subtly influencing what comes next. And this is where seasonal thinking begins to expand beyond weather entirely. Because once you see continuity in nature, you start to recognize it in everything that depends on nature. Forests do not reset each year. They accumulate history. A forest that has experienced decades of mild winters will behave differently than one shaped by harsher cycles. A region influenced by consistent rainfall will develop different soil and plant structures than one shaped by irregular precipitation. So even the same season is never experienced on identical ground. The ground itself has changed, and this slow accumulation is one of the most important hidden structures in nature. Change does not erase what came before it. It builds on top of it, layer upon layer, year upon year, season upon season, and eventually, what appears stable is actually the result of countless small adjustments that have settled into balance over time. This is why ecosystems feel coherent even while constantly changing. Because change is not random disruption, it is structured adjustment. Even when events appear sudden, storms, heat waves, cold snaps, they are still expressions of underlying systems that have been developing over longer periods. A storm does not emerge from nothing. It emerges from gradients of temperature and pressure that have been building quietly across regions. A drought does not appear instantly. It is the result of extended imbalance in moisture distribution. A cold wave is not a break in the system. It is a redistribution of air masses shaped by large-scale atmospheric circulation. So what feels sudden is often just the visible edge of something that has already been forming for a long time, and seasonal awareness helps reveal that hidden timeline. Because seasons are slow enough to observe, but dynamic enough to show change. They sit in a middle range between immediacy and geological time, fast enough to notice, slow enough to reflect on. And within that range, patterns become visible, not just in weather, but in life itself. Plants respond to seasonal timing with remarkable precision. They do not rely on fixed dates. They rely on environmental signals, light duration, temperature trends, soil moisture levels. These signals inform when to grow, when to rest, when to reproduce, and when to conserve energy. And because these signals vary slightly each year, behavior also varies slightly. So even within predictable structure, there is flexibility, and flexibility is what allows continuity without collapse. Animals also operate within this flexible structure. Some migrate long distances guided by environmental cues that shift subtly each year. Others remain in place but change behavior intensity. Some reduce activity during colder months. Others adjust feeding patterns according to resource availability. And even within a single species, individuals may respond differently depending on conditions. So diversity of response is part of seasonal stability. Not everything behaves the same way, and that difference prevents the system from becoming rigid. Even human systems reflect this indirectly. Agriculture, for example, has always been shaped by seasonal cycles. Planting, harvesting, irrigation, and soil preparation are all timed according to environmental rhythm. And even modern systems, despite technological control, still remain partially dependent on seasonal variation, because light and temperature cannot be fully separated from biological processes. So the seasonal structure persists beneath artificial environments, and this persistence creates a quiet continuity between human activity and natural cycles. Even in cities, where direct exposure to nature is reduced, seasonal changes are still felt. Air temperature shifts, daylight length changes, weather patterns influence movement and behavior, energy levels and sleep cycles adjust subtly. So even when not consciously observed, seasonal rhythm remains present in background experience, and this background presence shapes perception in ways that are often only noticed in contrast. A cold morning feels different after a long, warm period. A warm afternoon feels different after extended cool weather. The same environment can feel entirely different depending on what came before it. So seasons are not just physical states, they are relational experiences, defined not only by current conditions, but by comparison with previous conditions. And this relational aspect adds depth to perception, because nothing is experienced in isolation. Everything is experienced in sequence, and sequence creates meaning. Even landscapes gain meaning through seasonal sequence. A field is not just grass, it is grass that has gone through cycles of growth, decay, and renewal. A river is not just flowing water, it is a system that has carried snowmelt, rainwater, sediment, and nutrients across time. A forest is not just trees, it is a layered history of regeneration, disturbance, and recovery. So when you observe nature closely, you are not just seeing what is present, you are seeing what has accumulated over time. And accumulation is the silent structure behind all seasonal expression. Each season adds something, even when it appears to remove something. Winter removes leaves from trees, but adds structure to soil through decomposition. Autumn removes energy from above ground, but redistributes it below ground. Summer increases growth, but also increases consumption and cycling of resources. Spring initiates expansion, but relies on stored energy from previous cycles. So nothing is truly added or removed in isolation. It is always transferred, and transfer is continuous. This continuous transfer is what keeps systems alive, because life is not a static condition. It is a flow of exchange, energy in, energy out, matter in, matter out, information in, information out, and seasons are large-scale expressions of that exchange. They show how the entire planet participates in movement without ever reaching final stillness. Even the sky participates in this exchange. Clouds form and dissolve continuously. Moisture moves between atmosphere and surface. Heat is redistributed across hemispheres. Light shifts across latitudes as Earth rotates and orbits, and all of this creates the conditions within which life exists. So seasons are not just background conditions, they are active systems shaping everything within them, and yet they operate without interruption, without central control, and without final destination. They simply continue, adjusting, balancing, circulating. And tonight, across the planet, that circulation continues quietly, through air currents stretching across continents, through ocean systems moving heat across vast distances, through soil maintaining structure beneath resting fields, through forests shifting energy between growth and conservation, through every living system participating, in its own way, in the ongoing, layered, and endlessly repeating rhythm of seasonal change that never truly ends, but only transforms its form as it moves forward. If you continue following this seasonal rhythm even further, there is a point where the focus shifts again, not from nature itself, but from the way nature maintains continuity without needing awareness of continuity. The Earth does not remember seasons in the way a mind remembers events, and yet the pattern persists with remarkable consistency, not because it is being stored somewhere, but because it is being continuously recreated through physical conditions. Each orbit around the Sun re-establishes the same broad framework. Each tilt of the Earth reintroduces the same distribution of light and heat. Each atmospheric cycle redistributes energy in familiar but never identical ways. So the cycle is not preserved as a fixed record. It is reconstructed in real time, and that reconstruction is always slightly different. This is why seasons feel both predictable and new at once. The structure is stable, but the expression is fluid, and this distinction becomes clearer when you observe how many systems are involved in producing what feels like a simple seasonal shift. Solar radiation interacts with the atmosphere. The atmosphere interacts with oceans. Oceans interact with land masses. Land masses influence wind patterns. Wind patterns influence moisture distribution. Moisture distribution influences vegetation. Vegetation influences atmospheric composition through gas exchange and transpiration, and all of these interactions loop back into one another continuously. So a season is not a single event. It is the visible outcome of many overlapping systems adjusting simultaneously. And because these systems operate at different speeds, the result is always layered. Some changes happen quickly, others take weeks or months, others unfold over years. So what you experience as a season is actually a compressed expression of multiple timescales happening together. And that compression is what makes seasonal change perceptible. Without compression, the system would be too slow to notice. Without variation, it would be too uniform to feel. So nature exists in a carefully balanced middle range between repetition and difference. Enough repetition to create structure, enough difference to create evolution. And this balance is not only environmental, it is also biological. Life itself depends on this same principle. Cells in living organisms are constantly renewing. Some cells divide rapidly, others remain stable for long periods. Some structures regenerate quickly, others change slowly over time. So even within a single organism, there is seasonal-like variation in rates of change, fast processes and slow processes operating simultaneously. And this internal rhythm mirrors external seasonal rhythm in a subtle way. The body does not operate outside the environment. It reflects it in scaled-down form. And this reflection is not symbolic, it is functional, because biological systems evolved within seasonal environments. So adaptation is not abstract, it is structural. Even human perception is influenced by these layered rhythms. Attention shifts with environmental conditions. Focus becomes sharper or more diffuse depending on light, temperature, and sensory input. Memory retrieval can feel different depending on atmospheric conditions or seasonal context. Even thought patterns can subtly change with long-term environmental exposure. Not dramatically, but enough to be noticeable in reflection. So experience is never independent of environment. It is always co-produced, and this co-production becomes more visible when observing nature closely over time. A single tree does not appear to change much from day to day, but over months, its structure shifts. Over years, its shape evolves. Over decades, its presence transforms entirely. Yet at every stage, it remains recognizably itself. And this continuity through transformation is one of the most stable patterns in nature. Identity is not fixed form, it is ongoing process. And process is what seasons reveal most clearly, because nothing in seasonal systems remains static. Everything moves through phases: expansion, contraction, accumulation, release, growth, rest, transition, and return. But return is never identical. It carries traces of everything that came before it. So even repetition contains history, and history is embedded in physical structure. Soil layers contain past vegetation. Ice layers contain past atmospheric conditions. Tree rings contain past seasonal variations. Ocean sediments contain long-term environmental records. So nature is full of memory, not stored as information in a single place, but distributed across physical structures. And this distributed memory is what allows long-term continuity without central control. No single system holds the entire record, but every system contains part of it, and together, they form a coherent pattern across time. Seasons are one of the most visible expressions of this distributed memory, because each season is influenced by what preceded it. A warm winter affects spring soil conditions. A wet summer affects autumn vegetation cycles. A dry year affects long-term ecological balance. So each seasonal phase is partially shaped by accumulated history. And this accumulation is always ongoing. Nothing is ever reset completely, only adjusted. And this adjustment is what allows ecosystems to remain resilient across variability. Because resilience is not resistance to change. It is the capacity to incorporate change without losing structure. And incorporation is continuous. Even disturbances become part of future stability. A storm that reshapes a forest creates new light conditions for growth. A flood that alters soil composition creates new ecological niches. A fire that clears vegetation allows regeneration under different conditions. So disruption is not external to the system, it is part of the system. And this integration of disruption into continuity is one of the defining characteristics of natural cycles. Even what appears destructive contributes to long-term balance, not immediately, not directly, but through extended chains of interaction, and this is where seasonal thinking expands beyond immediate observation. Because seasons are not just about visible change, they are about time distributed across layers of interaction. Some effects appear quickly, others appear much later. Some influence local conditions, others influence distant systems, and all of them are connected through continuous exchange. So when you observe a season closely, you are not just observing weather patterns, you are observing a network of interdependent systems adjusting across multiple timescales. And this network never pauses, even during apparent stillness, even during quiet moments, even during periods of minimal visible activity. The system continues adjusting internally, slowly, continuously, without interruption. And tonight, across the planet, that adjustment remains active through shifting atmospheric currents, through ocean circulation patterns moving heat across hemispheres, through soil processes quietly transforming organic material, through forests maintaining balance between growth and rest, through animals adjusting behavior in response to subtle environmental signals, and through every living and non-living system participating in the ongoing, layered, and continuous rhythm of seasonal change that never truly ends, but only shifts form as it moves forward through time. If you continue following the seasonal rhythm a little further, there is a subtle shift in how the system begins to feel. It stops appearing like something that is happening to the world and starts feeling like something the world is continuously doing to itself, not as an event, but as a constant mode of operation, a self-maintaining cycle of adjustment that never needs to pause in order to function. This is where seasons begin to feel less like separate chapters and more like one continuous process with different visible expressions. Because beneath the differences in temperature, light, and atmosphere, the underlying mechanism remains the same. Energy enters the system. Energy moves through it. Energy is redistributed. And then the conditions shift again. Nothing leaves the system. Nothing exists outside it. Everything is transformation within it. And when you observe this long enough, even the idea of change starts to feel slightly different. Change is no longer something unusual. It becomes the default state. What requires explanation is not change itself, but temporary stability. A winter field covered in snow is not an absence of activity. It is a configuration where activity is reorganized into slower, more internal processes. A summer forest is not simply more alive than winter. It is more externally expressive of processes that are always present at some level. And this distinction matters because it removes the idea of seasons as opposites. Instead, they become variations in expression of the same underlying system. And once you see that, you begin to notice how many layers of continuity exist beneath the visible world. Soil is one of the most important of these layers. It is often perceived as static ground, but it is constantly processing time. Organic matter decomposes and recombines. Moisture shifts through capillary movement. Microbial life continuously transforms material into new forms of usable energy. Roots extend, retract, and adjust their patterns depending on seasonal conditions above them. So even when the surface appears still, the foundation is active, and that activity is not random. It is structured by seasonal rhythm. Temperature determines decomposition speed. Moisture determines biological activity. Light indirectly influences surface vegetation, which in turn influences soil composition. So the underground world is not separate from the seasonal cycle. It is one of its deepest participants. And the same is true for atmospheric systems. What we experience as weather is only the surface layer of much larger circulation patterns. Air is constantly moving in response to pressure differences created by uneven heating of the Earth's surface. Warm air rises. Cool air descends, moisture evaporates and condenses. Wind redistributes energy across regions, and these processes are never paused. Even calm weather is part of ongoing atmospheric adjustment. So stillness in the sky is not absence of motion. It is balanced motion, a temporary equilibrium in a constantly shifting system. And seasonal transitions are simply large-scale reorganizations of that equilibrium. In spring, the system shifts toward expansion. In summer, toward stability of activity. In autumn, toward redistribution. In winter, toward conservation. But none of these states are fixed. They overlap at their edges. They blend into one another gradually. And this gradual blending is what makes seasonal change feel continuous rather than abrupt. Even biological systems are structured around this gradual transition. Plants do not switch states instantly. They respond incrementally to environmental signals. Bud formation begins before full warmth arrives. Leaf growth accelerates as conditions stabilize. Flowering occurs when multiple thresholds align rather than a single trigger activating. And this layered responsiveness allows ecosystems to remain synchronized without central coordination. Each organism responds to local conditions, and those responses collectively form the seasonal pattern. So the season is not imposed from above. It emerges from interaction, and emergence is one of the most important principles in natural systems. Complex patterns arise from simple interactions repeated across many scales. No single leaf determines the shape of a forest. No single raindrop determines the flow of a river. No single temperature shift determines a climate pattern. But together, these small interactions produce large-scale structure. And that structure is what we recognize as seasons. So in a sense, seasons are not things that exist independently. They are patterns of relationship between many smaller processes, and those relationships are constantly being renegotiated. Even within a single day, micro-adjustments are taking place. Morning light begins warming surfaces. Midday heat increases atmospheric movement. Evening cooling shifts energy balance. Night stabilizes conditions for slower processes. So the daily cycle is nested inside the seasonal cycle. And the seasonal cycle is nested inside larger planetary cycles, each layer influencing the others, each layer depending on the others, and none of them fully separate. This nested structure is what gives natural time its depth, because time is not experienced as a single line. It is experienced as overlapping rhythms, some fast, some slow, some visible, some invisible, and perception moves between them depending on context and attention. A person may notice daily weather more than seasonal trends, or may only notice seasonal shifts when comparing across months, or may only recognize long-term climate patterns when looking across years. So awareness itself has scale, and that scale determines what is perceived as change and what is perceived as stability. But in nature, both are always present. Change is constant, stability is emergent, and neither exists without the other. A forest persists because it changes in controlled ways. A river persists because it continuously replaces its own water. An ecosystem persists because it balances loss and renewal simultaneously. So persistence is not resistance to change. It is organized change over time, and seasons are one of the clearest expressions of that principle, because they show that even large-scale environmental shifts can occur without breaking continuity. The system adapts rather than collapses. It adjusts rather than resets. It evolves rather than restarts. And this ongoing adjustment is what allows life to continue across vast variations in condition. Even extreme environments follow this principle. Life does not disappear in response to difficulty. It adapts its form, timing, and structure. It finds rhythm within constraint, and that rhythm becomes the basis for survival. So seasonal awareness is ultimately awareness of adaptation itself, of how systems remain coherent while constantly changing. And when observed quietly, without urgency, this creates a particular kind of understanding, not dramatic, not emotional, but steady, a recognition that nothing in nature is fixed, yet nothing is random. Everything is movement within structure, and structure within movement. And tonight, as the Earth continues rotating through its long-established path, that balance remains active everywhere at once, in shifting winds, in circulating oceans, in quiet soil processes beneath resting landscapes, in forests adjusting internal cycles of energy, in animals responding to subtle environmental cues, and in every living system participating, continuously and without interruption, in the ongoing seasonal rhythm that never truly ends, but only changes its expression as it moves forward through time.